ancient masters discovered something profound. True peace isn't something we achieve through effort, but something we uncover by releasing what prevents its natural emergence. Tonight, we will journey through Buddhist tales that gently remind us of this truth. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The stories you'll hear tonight aren't complicated teachings or difficult concepts to master. They're quiet doorways into the kind of profound rest your soul has been seeking. Each tale carries the wisdom of teachers who learned that peace doesn't come from solving every problem or controlling every outcome, but from discovering the stillness that's already here, waiting beneath the surface of our searching. Let your shoulders drop now. Feel your body growing heavier with each breath. Trust that the wisdom carried in these stories will continue working long after you've drifted into sleep. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. Master Joshin ran a small temple high in the mountains where the air was crisp and clean. He was known throughout the region for his wisdom and gentle ways. The temple itself was simple, with polished wooden floors that gleamed in the morning light and paper windows that looked out at groves of bamboo that whispered in the mountain breeze. Every morning at sunrise, the monks gathered in the main hall for their morning meal. It was a peaceful time, when the only sounds were the soft rustle of robes and the gentle clink of wooden bowls being set in place. They sat on worn meditation cushions arranged around low wooden tables, their movements slow and mindful. The hall was spare and beautiful. Sunlight streamed through the windows in golden beams, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. The scent of incense lingered faintly from the morning prayers, mixing with the aroma of fresh rice and green tea. But there was something unusual that every visitor noticed immediately. Next to Master Joshin's regular place at the head of the room, there was always an extra cushion. It sat there day after day, positioned exactly as if someone important were expected to arrive at any moment. This wasn't just any cushion either. It was identical to the master's own, covered in the same deep blue fabric, placed with the same careful precision. A ceramic bowl was set before it each morning, filled with the same simple rice the monks ate. Polished wooden chopsticks were laid beside the bowl. Even a small clay cup for tea was placed there, steam rising from its surface in the cool mountain air. Yet morning after morning, meal after meal, season after season, the cushion remained empty. No one sat there. The rice grew cold and was quietly removed. The tea was poured fresh each day, only to grow cold again. The chopsticks were never touched. The younger monks whispered about it in the garden as they swept leaves. Some thought it might be reserved for a distinguished teacher who was expected to visit someday. Others believed it was connected to some ancient ceremony they hadn't yet learned about. A few wondered if Master Joshin was beginning to show signs of age, perhaps forgetting to remove an extra place setting. But none dared to ask directly. Master Joshin was known for his patience with questions. He never made students feel foolish for not understanding something. Yet something about the empty cushion felt sacred, surrounded by an invisible boundary that shouldn't be crossed. The silence around it was deeper than the usual quiet of meditation, more profound than the hush that fell during evening prayers. One crisp autumn morning, when the maple trees outside had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, a young monk named Keitaro arrived at the temple. He was bright and eager, his eyes full of curiosity about everything he encountered. He had come from a large monastery in the valley below, where hundreds of students practiced together and every tradition was explained in careful detail by senior monks. Keitaro noticed the empty cushion immediately during his very first meal. His eyes kept drifting to it throughout that first breakfast. The untouched bowl bothered him. The unused chopsticks seemed to call out for explanation. By his third day, the mystery had begun to consume his thoughts. He found himself staring at the empty place during meals, trying to understand its significance. He watched Master Joshin for any sign of acknowledgement of the unused setting, but the old teacher ate his simple meals with complete equanimity, as if nothing unusual were present. After a full week of growing curiosity, Keitaro could no longer contain himself. The question felt like a stone in his chest that grew heavier each day. One morning after breakfast had ended and the other monks had dispersed to their various duties, he approached Master Joshin with careful steps. The old master was sitting quietly outside the hall on a wooden bench, watching clouds drift past the mountain peaks. His weathered hands rested peacefully in his lap, and his eyes held the deep calm that comes from years of meditation. Keitaro bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching the ground. "Master," he said with great respect, "please forgive me for asking, but I must know. Why is there always an empty cushion at our table? Why do we set food there each day when no one sits there? The mystery is keeping me awake at night." The old master looked at him with kind eyes that seemed to hold depths Keitaro couldn't fathom. He was quiet for a long moment, and Keitaro could hear the wind moving through the pine trees that surrounded the temple. Finally, Master Joshin gestured to the space beside him on the bench. "Sit with me," he said gently. They sat together in comfortable silence. The morning sun warmed their faces, and somewhere in the distance, a temple bell chimed softly. Keitaro could feel his impatience slowly dissolving in the peaceful atmosphere. Finally, Master Joshin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The cushion is for the part of me I haven't let go of yet." Keitaro's brow furrowed with confusion. "I don't understand, Master." "What part?" The old monk turned to look directly at him. "Every morning when I wake up, I think I am finished with ego. I think I have released all attachment to being someone special. I believe I have let go of pride, of the need to be seen as wise or holy or important." He paused, watching a bird land on a nearby branch. "But each day, as I move through my routines, I discover small pieces of self that I am still carrying. Some mornings I catch myself feeling proud of my years of practice. Other days I notice myself enjoying when visitors call me Master with great reverence. Sometimes I find satisfaction in being known as the wisest teacher in these mountains." Keitaro listened intently, beginning to glimpse the profound honesty in this admission. "Even the thought that I am humble," Master Joshin continued, "is a form of pride. Even believing I have achieved something through my spiritual practice is a way of holding on to being someone special. The cushion reminds me that there is always more ego to release, more attachment to dissolve, more ideas about myself to let go of." The young monk sat in stunned silence. He had never heard a teacher speak so openly about still having ego, still struggling with pride. In his previous monastery, the masters seemed to present themselves as having completed their spiritual journey. Master Joshin placed a gentle hand on Keitaro's shoulder. "When I see that empty cushion each morning, I remember that I am still learning. It keeps me honest about the subtle ways I cling to being Master Joshin, instead of simply being what I am beneath all names and titles. But Master, Keitaro said hesitantly, surely after so many years of practice, you must have achieved great wisdom. The old monk chuckled softly. The greatest wisdom I have gained is knowing how much wisdom I still lack. The empty cushion is my daily reminder that the path of letting go never truly ends. There is always something more to release. From that moment forward, Keitaro understood. The cushion wasn't strange or mysterious at all. It was profoundly honest. It was a daily acknowledgement that spiritual practice isn't about reaching some final state of perfection, but about continuously releasing the countless ways we try to be someone important. As the seasons changed and Keitaro settled into life at the mountain temple, he began to see his own invisible cushions. He noticed how he wanted the other monks to think he was intelligent during discussions of Buddhist texts. He observed his pleasure when Master Joshin praised his meditation posture. He caught himself comparing his progress to newer students and feeling superior. Each discovery was humbling, but also liberating. Instead of pretending these ego movements didn't exist, he could acknowledge them honestly, the way Master Joshin acknowledged his own ongoing attachments. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside the windows, Keitaro was helping to serve the evening meal when he had a sudden realization. He saw that every person in the room, including himself, had their own invisible empty cushions. Everyone was carrying parts of themselves they hadn't yet released. Everyone was still attached to ideas about who they were or who they should become. The understanding brought him a deep sense of compassion, both for himself and for all the other struggling human beings trying to find peace. We were all in the same situation, all learning to let go, all discovering new layers of attachment just when we thought we were free. Years passed, and Keitaro's practice deepened. He learned to catch the subtle movements of ego more quickly, to release them more easily. But he never reached a point where they stopped arising entirely. The empty cushion teaching had prepared him for this reality. When Keitaro eventually became a teacher himself, he also kept an empty cushion at his table. New students would ask him about it with the same burning curiosity he had once felt, and he would share the teaching that had transformed his understanding of spiritual practice. We all carry invisible burdens, he would tell them. Ideas about ourselves that feel too important to release. Stories we tell ourselves about who we are or what we've accomplished. The empty cushion reminds us that freedom comes not from perfecting these stories, but from gradually letting them go. Perhaps we all need an empty cushion in our lives. Not a physical one, necessarily, but a reminder that we are still carrying things we don't need. The self that insists on being right in arguments. The self that needs others to recognize our accomplishments. The self that holds grudges like precious treasures. The self that won't forgive old hurts. These aren't evil or wrong, but they can become heavy to carry. They can prevent the natural peace that emerges when we stop trying to maintain so many ideas about ourselves. Tonight, as you rest, you might gently notice what invisible cushions you carry. What parts of your identity feel too important to question? What stories about yourself seem too precious to release? There's no need to force anything or judge yourself harshly. Simply notice with the same gentle honesty that Master Joshin brought to his own attachments. The beautiful truth that the Mountain Master discovered is this: peace doesn't come from becoming someone perfect or enlightened. It comes from gradually releasing the exhausting need to be anyone special at all. When we stop defending and maintaining so many ideas about ourselves, a natural freedom emerges that needs no protection. In a prosperous trading town at the foot of the mountains, where merchant caravans stopped to rest and restock their supplies, there lived a man named Daiso, who had spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth and possessions. His large house sat at the center of town, built from the finest wood and decorated with beautiful paintings and sculptures from distant lands. Daiso owned 3 successful shops that sold silk, spices, and precious metals. His warehouses were filled floor to ceiling with goods from across the known world, intricate carpets from the western deserts, delicate porcelain from the southern kingdoms, rare books written in languages most people had never heard of, and jewelry that sparkled with gems found in mountain caves far from any settlement. Every morning, Daiso would wake before dawn and walk through his storerooms, running his fingers over his possessions, mentally calculating their worth. The feel of fine silk beneath his hands gave him deep satisfaction. The sight of gold coins stacked in wooden chests filled him with pride. He employed dozens of workers, and when they bowed respectfully and called him Master Daiso, he felt the warm glow of being important and successful. Yet, despite all his achievements, Daiso found himself increasingly restless as the years passed. His sleep had become troubled, filled with worries about protecting his wealth from thieves, concerns about business competitors who might steal his customers, and elaborate plans for acquiring even more possessions. He would lie awake for hours each night, his mind churning with schemes and anxieties. The weight of managing so many possessions had begun to exhaust him in ways he hadn't expected. Each beautiful object required care and attention. Every business deal demanded constant vigilance. The more he owned, the more energy he needed to spend protecting and organizing it all. One spring morning, while walking through the town market, Daiso overheard 2 travelers discussing a famous Zen master named Tetsugen, who lived in a simple hut by the river that ran along the edge of town. According to their conversation, this master had found perfect contentment despite owning almost nothing. How can someone with no possessions be truly happy? One traveler asked the other. They say he sleeps like a child every night, came the reply, and wakes each morning with a smile that could light up the darkest room. This conversation planted a seed of curiosity in Daiso's mind. How could someone who owned nothing feel more content than he did with all his wealth? The question began to follow him through his days, surfacing during quiet moments when he wasn't actively engaged in business. After several weeks of growing fascination with this puzzle, Daiso decided he must meet this master and discover the secret of contentment without possessions. But he couldn't imagine approaching such a wise teacher empty-handed. Surely a man of spiritual accomplishment would appreciate fine gifts as tokens of respect. Daiso spent an entire day selecting the most beautiful treasures from his collection. He chose a set of silk scarves so fine they seemed to float like captured clouds. He picked golden ornaments that caught the light and threw dancing reflections across the walls. He selected his rarest incense, imported at great expense from monasteries in far-off mountains. Finally, he packed his most prized possession, a tea set made from clay so pure and beautiful that drinking from it was said to be a meditation in itself. All of these treasures were carefully wrapped and loaded into heavy leather sacks. When everything was ready, Daiso loaded the sacks onto his strongest horse, a magnificent animal that was itself a symbol of his success. But as they began the journey to the river, he noticed that the horse struggled under the enormous weight. They had to stop frequently to rest, and what should have been a short walk became a laborious expedition. When they finally arrived at Master Tetsugun's dwelling, Daizo was surprised by what he found. The hut was tiny, barely large enough for one person to sleep in. It was built from simple bamboo and had a roof thatched with dried grass. There was no decoration of any kind, no sign of wealth or status. Master Tetsugun himself sat peacefully beside the flowing water, wearing a brown robe that had clearly been mended many times. His face was deeply lined with age, but his eyes held a clarity and peace that Daizo had never seen before. When he saw Daizo approaching with his heavily loaded horse, the master smiled with genuine warmth. "Welcome, friend," Tetsugun said, rising slowly from his seated position. "You have traveled far today." "Master," Daizo said, bowing as respectfully as he knew how, "I have brought you gifts to show my deep appreciation for your wisdom, though I know such humble offerings are unworthy of your greatness." He began the laborious process of unloading the heavy sacks from his struggling horse. Each treasure was unwrapped and displayed carefully on a clean cloth spread beside the river. The silk scarves fluttered in the gentle breeze. The golden ornaments caught the afternoon sunlight and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. The rare incense filled the air with exotic fragrances that spoke of distant temples and sacred ceremonies. Master Tetsugun watched this display quietly, his expression neither impressed nor dismissive, simply observing with gentle attention. When the last treasure had been arranged for viewing, he spoke. "These are indeed beautiful objects," he said with sincere appreciation. "Thank you for your generosity. But tell me, how did you feel during the journey here?" Daizo paused, surprised by the question. He had expected the master to comment on the value or beauty of the gifts, not inquire about his travel experience. "It was quite difficult, actually," he admitted. "The sacks were very heavy. My horse could barely carry them all. We had to stop and rest many times along the way. I was worried the whole time that something might fall off and be damaged." Master Tetsugun nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel right now, having set everything down?" This question struck Daizo with unexpected force. He suddenly became aware of his body in a way he hadn't been moments before. His shoulders, which had been tense with worry during the entire journey, felt remarkably light. His back, which had ached from bending over the heavy sacks, was now straight and comfortable. The anxiety that had gripped him during the trip had completely disappeared. "I feel relieved," he said with genuine surprise in his voice. "Much lighter than I have in a long time." Master Tetsugun smiled with deep understanding. "You have just learned the most important teaching I could offer you. Possessions are only beautiful when you can set them down." "But Master," Daizo said, gesturing toward the displayed treasures, "don't you want these gifts? They are worth more than most people earn in several lifetimes. Surely they could be useful to you or to others who might benefit from them." "They are indeed valuable and beautiful," the master replied. "But watch carefully." He reached down and picked up one of the golden ornaments, holding it up so that the late afternoon sunlight made it sparkle brilliantly. "See how lovely this is?" Daizo nodded, admiring the way the precious metal caught and reflected the light. Then Master Tetsugun gently placed the ornament back on the cloth. "And see how it remains just as lovely? I was able to enjoy its beauty completely without needing to possess it. My appreciation required no ownership." This simple demonstration puzzled Daizo deeply. In his world, enjoying beautiful things was inseparable from owning them. How could you truly appreciate something if it wasn't yours? The master seemed to understand his confusion. He gestured toward the river flowing beside them. "Do you own this water?" "No, of course not." No one can own a river. Yet can you not see how it sparkles in the sunlight? Can you not hear its gentle music as it flows over the stones? Can you not feel the cool, refreshing breeze it creates? Does your lack of ownership make any of these pleasures less real or less satisfying? For the first time, Daiso began to glimpse what the master was suggesting. He could indeed enjoy the river's beauty without possessing it. The sight and sound of flowing water brought him genuine pleasure, even though he had no control over it and could not take it home with him. "I think I understand a little," he said slowly. "But surely owning beautiful things must add something to life. Why else would people work so hard to acquire possessions?" Master Tetsugen picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank and held it in his palm. "Having things can certainly be pleasant," he agreed. "But there is a crucial difference between having something and being had by it. When you must carry your possessions everywhere in your mind, constantly worrying about them, protecting them, organizing them, they begin to possess you more than you possess them." He tossed the stone gently into the water, where it disappeared with a small splash. True ownership means being able to let go when the time comes. When holding on to something becomes a burden, the wise person knows how to release it. The foolish person continues carrying unnecessary weight, growing more tired with each step. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Master Tetsugen invited Daiso to share his evening meal. The food was simple: rice, vegetables from a small garden behind the hut, and tea made from leaves the master had gathered himself from wild plants growing along the riverbank. As they ate together beside the flowing water, something remarkable happened to Daiso. He felt a quality of peace and contentment that he hadn't experienced since childhood. The simple food tasted more delicious than the elaborate banquets he regularly hosted. The plain tea was more refreshing than the rare and expensive varieties in his collection. The sound of the river and the sight of the first stars appearing in the darkening sky filled him with a joy that no possession had ever provided. "Master," he said quietly as they finished their meal, "I feel happier sitting here with you tonight than I have felt in my mansion surrounded by all my treasures. How is this possible? Why do you think that might be?" Tetsugen asked gently, neither confirming nor denying Daiso's observation. Daiso considered the question carefully. "I suppose it's because right now I'm not worried about protecting anything. I'm not thinking about what I might lose or what I still need to acquire. I'm not planning or scheming or calculating. I'm simply here, enjoying what's present." The master nodded approvingly. "You have discovered something profound. Peace doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less. Happiness isn't found in accumulation, but in appreciation of what's already here." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell completely around them. The river continued its eternal song, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly to its mate. Daiso felt his mind growing quiet in a way it hadn't in years. When morning came, Daiso made a decision that surprised even himself. He asked Master Tetsugen not to keep the treasures he had brought, but to use them to help people in need. The silk scarves could warm those who had no proper clothing. The golden ornaments could be traded for food for hungry families. The precious tea set could be used to serve simple meals to travelers who had no place to rest. But these treasures represent years of work, Master Tetsugen observed. Are you certain you want to give them away? Daiso looked at the carefully arranged gifts, then at his horse, no longer burdened by their weight. He thought of the journey here, how heavy and difficult it had been, and how light and free he felt now. I'm more certain of this than I have been of anything in a long time, he replied. These treasures have taught me their greatest lesson by helping me understand what I don't need to carry. He loaded his empty sacks onto his horse and prepared to return home. The animal moved with an energy and grace that had been impossible the day before. The journey that had been such a struggle became a pleasant ride through beautiful countryside that Daiso actually noticed for the first time in years. When he arrived back in town, something fundamental had shifted in his relationship with his possessions. He still conducted his business and took care of his responsibilities, but the desperate need to accumulate more had disappeared. He began giving away items from his storerooms to people who needed them more than he did. His neighbors noticed the change immediately. Where once Daiso had seemed driven and anxious, always rushing from one deal to the next, now he appeared calm and present. He would take time to speak with his workers about their families instead of focusing only on productivity. He would pause to appreciate the beauty of goods in his shops instead of seeing them only as sources of profit. When people asked what had happened to transform him so dramatically, Daiso would tell them about his encounter with Master Tetsugen and the day he learned to set down his heavy sacks. I discovered that true wealth isn't having everything you want, he would say. It's wanting nothing more than what you have. The heaviest burdens we carry are often the ones we choose to pick up. Word of Daiso's transformation spread throughout the region, and people began coming to him for advice about finding happiness and contentment. He would share the simple wisdom he had learned by the river, that possessions are most beautiful when we can appreciate them without clinging to them, and that the greatest luxury is the freedom to travel light through life. Years passed, and Daiso became known not for his wealth, but for his wisdom and generosity. His sleep became peaceful again, untroubled by worries about protecting possessions or acquiring more. He had learned that security comes not from having more, but from needing less. Both Master Joshin with his empty cushion and the merchant Daiso discovered the same profound truth. Freedom comes not from accumulating more, but from releasing what we think we cannot live without. Whether it's ideas about ourselves or material possessions, the things we cling to most tightly often become the very chains that prevent our natural peace from emerging. This teaching from Zen Buddhism offers profound medicine for our restless modern lives. We are conditioned to believe that happiness comes from getting more recognition, more security, more control, more possessions, more achievements. But the mountain masters discovered the opposite truth. Contentment comes from learning to travel light. Tonight, as you prepare for the deep rest your body craves, notice what you might be carrying that you don't actually need. What mental burdens feel too important to set down? What worries are you clutching as if they were precious treasures? What ideas about yourself seem too valuable to question? Just as Daiso felt profound relief when he unloaded his heavy sacks, you too can experience the lightness that comes from letting go. You don't have to solve this through effort or force. Simply allowing your awareness to notice what you're carrying is often enough to begin the natural process of release. The Zen masters understood that we are not our possessions, our achievements, our roles, or even our thoughts about ourselves. We are the spacious awareness that can hold all these things lightly, appreciating their beauty when they're present and remaining peaceful when they're gone. In the gentle darkness of sleep, this awareness naturally returns to its original freedom. All the things you think you must carry, all the burdens you believe are too important to release, naturally dissolve into the peaceful emptiness from which they first arose. Allow yourself to rest in this spacious peace now. Let your breathing become slow and natural. Feel your body releasing completely into the support beneath you. Trust that the most valuable aspects of who you are cannot be lost because they were never separate from your true nature to begin with. The empty cushion and the merchant's heavy sacks both point to the same liberating truth. You are already free. You have always been free. The only thing preventing you from experiencing this freedom is your belief that you must carry burdens that were never really yours to begin with. In a mountain monastery where the winter winds howled through ancient pine trees, there lived a young monk named Kenji who burned with an intense desire for enlightenment. He had come to the temple 2 years earlier, leaving behind his family's farm and his comfortable life in the valley below, driven by an unshakable conviction that he was meant for something greater than ordinary existence. From his very first day at the monastery, Kenji threw himself into spiritual practice with a determination that impressed even the most dedicated senior monks. While others slept, he would rise at 3 a.m. to sit in meditation in the cold meditation hall, his breath visible in the frigid air. The wooden floors were so cold they seemed to burn his bare feet, but he endured the discomfort as a test of his commitment. During the day, when other monks took breaks between their duties, Kenji would find a quiet corner and continue his meditation practice. He would sit motionless for hours, his back rigid with effort, fighting against every wandering thought that arose in his mind. When his legs became numb from sitting in the traditional posture, he would remain seated until the pain became almost unbearable, believing that such endurance would accelerate his spiritual progress. Kenji also pushed himself to fast regularly, eating only one small meal each day while the other monks ate their normal portions. He had read stories of ancient masters who achieved enlightenment through extreme austerity, and he was determined to prove his seriousness through similar sacrifice. His body grew thin and his face became gaunt, but he took pride in his apparent dedication. The more intensely Kenji practiced, however, the more agitated and restless he became. Instead of finding the peace he sought, his mind seemed to race even faster than before. His meditation sessions became battles against his own thoughts, exhausting struggles that left him feeling defeated rather than enlightened. His sleep became fitful and disturbed, filled with dreams of failing to achieve the spiritual heights he desperately wanted to reach. Other monks began to notice Kenji's deteriorating condition. His eyes, which had once sparkled with enthusiasm, now appeared strained and tired. His movements, once fluid and graceful, became jerky and tense. During group discussions of Buddhist teachings, he would ask frantic questions about how to meditate more effectively, how to empty his mind more completely, how to force himself into states of enlightenment. After months of this intensifying struggle, Kenji's frustration reached a breaking point. One evening, after a particularly difficult meditation session, he approached Master Endo, the elderly abbot who was renowned throughout the region for his gentle wisdom and profound understanding. Master Endo was sitting quietly in his simple quarters, sipping tea and watching the evening light fade behind the mountains. His presence radiated the very peace that Kenji had been desperately trying to achieve through his intense efforts. "Master," Kenji said, his voice tight with desperation, "I have been practicing harder than anyone in this monastery for almost 2 years. I meditate longer, fast more often, and push myself beyond what I thought possible. Yet I feel further from enlightenment than when I arrived. What am I doing wrong? How can I try harder? What more can I sacrifice? Master Endo looked at the young monk with eyes full of compassion. He could see the suffering that Kenji's intense efforts had created, the way his desperate seeking had become a barrier to the very peace he wanted to find. "Come with me," the master said simply, setting down his teacup and rising slowly from his cushion. Master Endo led Kenji outside into the monastery courtyard, where the cold night air bit at their faces and their breath formed small clouds in the darkness. Snow had begun falling earlier that day, and everything was covered in a pristine white blanket that sparkled in the moonlight. In the center of the courtyard stood an ancient stone basin that collected water for the temple's daily use. The water had frozen solid during the cold day, forming a thick block of ice that gleamed like crystal in the pale light. Master Endo stopped beside the basin and gestured toward the ice. "Kenji," he said gently, "I want you to melt this ice with your bare hands." Kenji looked confused, but was eager to prove his dedication. He placed his hands on the frozen surface and began rubbing vigorously, trying to generate heat through friction. The ice was painfully cold against his palms, and despite his intense efforts, it showed no signs of melting. He rubbed harder, pressing down with all his strength, his hands growing red and raw from the cold and friction. "It's not working, Master," Kenji said through gritted teeth, continuing his futile efforts. "Try harder," Master Endo said calmly. Kenji doubled his efforts, rubbing and pressing until his hands felt like they were burning from the cold. Still, the ice remained completely solid. After several minutes of this painful struggle, he stopped and looked at his teacher with exhaustion and defeat. "I can't do it, Master. My hands are too cold and the ice is too thick." Master Endo nodded. "Now stand back and simply watch." As they stood in the quiet courtyard, something subtle began to happen. The night was gradually giving way to dawn, and the first faint rays of sunlight began to appear over the eastern mountains. As the golden light touched the ice in the stone basin, tiny drops of water began to form on its surface. The sunlight didn't struggle or strain. It simply shone with its natural warmth and radiance. The ice didn't resist or fight against the melting process. It simply responded to the gentle heat by gradually changing from solid to liquid. There was no force involved, no effort, no struggle. The transformation happened naturally and effortlessly. As they watched, the ice continued to melt slowly and steadily. Drop by drop, the solid block became flowing water. The sun didn't try to hurry the process or force it to happen faster. The ice didn't try to remain frozen or resist the change. Everything unfolded according to natural laws, without strain or struggle. "Do you see?" Master Endo asked softly as they watched this gentle transformation. Kenji stared at the melting ice, and suddenly something clicked in his understanding. "The sun doesn't try to melt the ice," he said slowly. "It simply shines, and the melting happens by itself." "Yes," the master nodded. "And what does this teach you about your spiritual practice?" The insight hit Kenji like a wave of cool water on a hot day. "I've been trying to force enlightenment instead of allowing it to unfold naturally. All my effort and struggle have been preventing the very thing I want to achieve." Master Endo smiled. "Awareness is like the sun, Kenji. It has its own natural radiance that doesn't require effort to maintain. When you try to force your mind to be peaceful, you create the very agitation you're trying to eliminate. When you allow awareness to shine naturally, transformation happens by itself. They stood together in comfortable silence as the ice continued its slow, natural melting. Kenji felt something shifting inside him, a release of the desperate tension that had driven his practice for so long. "But Master," Kenji asked, "how do I practice without trying? How do I meditate without effort?" "Return to your meditation cushion," Master Endo said, "but this time, don't try to achieve anything. Don't fight your thoughts or force your mind to be quiet. Simply sit and allow awareness to be what it naturally is. Be like the sun, shining without trying to shine." That evening, Kenji approached his meditation practice with a completely different attitude. Instead of sitting with rigid determination, he settled onto his cushion with gentle curiosity. Instead of fighting against his wandering thoughts, he allowed them to come and go like clouds passing through an open sky. Instead of trying to create peace, he rested in the awareness that was already peaceful beneath all the mental activity. The change was immediate and profound. For the first time in months, Kenji's meditation felt effortless and natural. His breathing slowed on its own, without any conscious control. His muscles relaxed without him trying to relax them. His mind, no longer being pushed and pulled by his efforts, began to settle like muddy water, becoming clear when left undisturbed. Over the following weeks, Kenji's entire approach to spiritual practice transformed. He continued to meditate regularly and follow the monastery's schedule, but his practice became like the sun's relationship to ice, natural, gentle, and surprisingly effective. The peace he had been desperately seeking began to emerge not through his efforts, but through his willingness to stop trying so hard. His sleep became deep and restorative again. His face regained its natural brightness. Other monks noticed that he moved with a new grace and spoke with a calm confidence that hadn't been there during his period of intense striving. 6 months later, Kenji experienced a spontaneous moment of profound understanding during a routine morning meditation. Without any effort or seeking on his part, the boundaries between meditator and meditation simply dissolved, leaving only pure awareness aware of itself. The enlightenment he had been chasing so desperately revealed itself to be the very awareness that had been present all along, simply waiting to be noticed rather than achieved. When Master Endo later asked him about this experience, Kenji smiled. "I finally understood that I was like a person searching everywhere for the glasses that were already on his face. The awareness I was seeking was the very awareness doing the seeking." Years later, when Kenji became a teacher himself, students would often come to him with the same desperate intensity he had once brought to practice. He would tell them about the morning he learned to stop trying to melt ice with his bare hands. "Spiritual awakening," he would say, "is not something you achieve through effort. It's something you allow by getting out of your own way. Be like the Sunday. Don't try to be radiant. Simply let your natural radiance shine." This teaching from the mountain monastery reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most practical insights. Effort and allowing are not the same thing. Kenji's mistake was believing that spiritual growth required force and struggle, when in fact it requires the opposite, a gentle allowing that trusts the natural intelligence of awareness itself. Many of us approach not just spiritual practice but all areas of life with Kenji's initial attitude. We try to force ourselves to be happy, struggle to make relationships work, or exhaust ourselves attempting to control outcomes that are beyond our influence. But the masters discovered that the most profound transformations happen not through force, but through a kind of graceful allowing. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on goals and aspirations. The sun is incredibly active in its shining, but it doesn't strain or struggle to produce light. Similarly, we can engage fully with life while learning to work with natural processes rather than against them. Tonight, as you rest, you might notice areas where you've been trying too hard. Where in your life are you attempting to melt ice with your bare hands instead of trusting the gentle warmth of natural processes? This awareness itself can be the beginning of a more graceful approach to whatever challenges you face. Allow your breathing to slow even more now. Feel your body releasing completely into the support beneath you. Notice how sleep comes not through effort, but through a gentle allowing, a trust in your body's natural wisdom to restore and renew itself. In a peaceful valley where a clear stream wound between rice fields and vegetable gardens, there lived a man named Hiroshi who had inherited his family's farm from his father and grandfather before him. The land was fertile and well tended, with rich black soil that could grow almost anything when properly cared for. Hiroshi was known throughout the village as a hard-working and dedicated farmer, but he had one weakness that often created problems for him: impatience. He wanted his crops to grow faster, his harvests to be larger, and his success to come more quickly than nature seemed willing to provide. Each spring, Hiroshi would plant his seeds with great enthusiasm and high expectations. But within days of planting, he would begin checking the soil obsessively, looking for signs of sprouting. He would dig up corners of his rows to see if the seeds were germinating properly. If growth seemed slower than he expected, he would add extra fertilizer, water more frequently, and try various techniques he had heard might accelerate the growing process. His neighbor, an elderly farmer named Master Tanaka, would often watch these frantic activities with a mixture of amusement and concern. Tanaka's own gardens flourished year after year with remarkable consistency, producing abundant harvests that were the envy of the entire region. Yet Tanaka seemed to do far less work than Hiroshi, spending much of his time simply sitting quietly among his plants, drinking tea and observing the subtle changes that marked the progression of the growing season. One particularly frustrating spring, Hiroshi's impatience reached new heights. He had planted his rice seedlings 3 weeks earlier, and they seemed to be growing much more slowly than he remembered from previous years. Every morning, he would rush to the rice field and measure the tiny green shoots, comparing them to marks he had made on bamboo stakes to track their progress. When the measurements showed only small increases from day to day, Hiroshi would become agitated and try new methods to stimulate faster growth. He adjusted the water levels constantly, changed the timing of his fertilizer applications, and even tried talking to the plants to encourage them to grow more quickly. His anxiety about the slow progress began to affect his sleep and his relationships with his family. At meals, he would discuss his concerns obsessively, wondering if the seeds were defective, if the soil had lost its fertility, or if some disease was affecting his crops. His wife grew tired of his constant worrying, and his children began to avoid him during his increasingly frequent visits to check on the rice field. One evening, after a particularly stressful day of measuring and remeasuring his crops, Hiroshi noticed that Master Tanaka was sitting peacefully beside his own rice field, which appeared to be growing at exactly the same rate as Hiroshi's. The elderly farmer seemed completely unconcerned about the pace of growth, simply watching the gentle evening breeze move through the green shoots. Unable to contain his frustration any longer, Hiroshi walked over to his neighbor's field. "Master Tanaka," he said with barely controlled agitation, "don't you worry about how slowly the rice is growing this year? My plants seem to be taking much longer than usual to reach their proper height." Master Tanaka looked up at Hiroshi with eyes that held a calm patience that comes from decades of working with natural cycles. "How tall are your rice plants today?" he asked. "Only 6 inches," Hiroshi replied immediately, having just finished his evening measurements. "They should be at least 8 inches by now, maybe 9. "And how tall were they yesterday?" 5 3/4 inches. "So they grew 1/4 inch in a single day?" "Yes, but that's too slow," Hiroshi said with exasperation. Master Tanaka smiled gently. "Come with me," he said, rising slowly from his seated position. He led Hiroshi to a section of his garden where mature bamboo grew in tall, graceful groves. The bamboo shoots were enormous, some reaching heights of 20 feet or more, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. "Do you know how bamboo grows?" Master Tanaka asked. "Of course. It grows very quickly. Bamboo is famous for how fast it shoots up." "That's true," the old farmer agreed. "Bamboo can grow 3 feet in a single day once it begins its rapid growth phase. But do you know what happens before that dramatic growth?" Hiroshi shook his head, wondering what this had to do with his rice problem. "For the first 4 or 5 years after bamboo is planted," Master Tanaka explained, "it barely grows at all above ground. Maybe a few inches in an entire year. A farmer who didn't understand bamboo might think the plants were defective or dying. He might dig them up to check the roots, add more fertilizer, or try to force faster growth." He gestured toward the towering bamboo around them. "But during those slow years, the bamboo is developing an extensive root system underground. It's building the foundation that will support its eventual rapid growth. When the roots are strong enough, the bamboo shoots up with incredible speed. But that speed is only possible because of the slow, patient preparation that happened first." Master Tanaka led Hiroshi back toward the rice fields. "Your rice plants are like young bamboo. They are developing their root systems, building the strength they need to produce abundant grain later in the season. When you constantly disturb them by checking their progress, adjusting their conditions, and trying to force faster growth, you interrupt this crucial foundation building process." As they walked, Hiroshi began to understand what his neighbor was suggesting. "You mean I should stop measuring the plants and just let them grow at their own pace?" "I mean you should learn to trust the wisdom that rice plants have developed over thousands of years of evolution. They know how to grow. Your job is to provide good conditions and then get out of their way." That night, Hiroshi found it difficult to sleep as he contemplated this new perspective on farming. He had always believed that successful agriculture required constant monitoring and intervention. The idea of simply trusting natural processes felt foreign and slightly frightening. But the next morning, instead of rushing to the rice field with his measuring sticks, Hiroshi tried a different approach. He sat quietly at the edge of his field, as he had seen Master Tanaka do, and simply observed without trying to change anything. At first, this felt impossibly difficult. His mind raced with worries about whether the plants were getting enough water, whether the fertilizer levels were correct, whether he should be doing something to help them grow faster. But as he continued sitting quietly, something began to shift in his perception. For the first time, Hiroshi noticed subtle details he had missed during his frantic measuring activities. He saw how the rice plants moved differently in morning light versus evening light. He observed the way individual shoots seemed to pulse with almost invisible growth. He noticed that the plants that were slightly larger were not necessarily healthier than their smaller neighbors. Most importantly, he began to sense that the rice field was alive with its own intelligence, responding to factors far more complex than anything he could control or measure. The plants were engaged in a sophisticated dance with soil, water, sunlight, and air that had been perfected over millennia of evolution. As days passed and Hiroshi continued his new practice of observant waiting rather than anxious intervention, something remarkable happened. His stress about the slow growth disappeared, replaced by a sense of wonder at the intricate processes he was witnessing. His sleep became peaceful again, no longer disturbed by worries about crop failure. 3 weeks later, Hiroshi noticed that his rice plants had begun growing noticeably faster. But more importantly, he realized that they had been growing perfectly all along. His measuring and comparing had created the illusion of inadequate progress, when in fact the plants had been following their natural timeline exactly as they should. By harvest time, Hiroshi's rice crop was the best he had ever produced. But the greater harvest was the understanding he had gained about working with natural processes rather than against them. He had learned that successful farming required not just hard work, but also patience, observation, and trust in the wisdom of living systems. The following spring, when new farmers would come to him asking for advice about accelerating crop growth, Hiroshi would share Master Tanaka's teaching about bamboo and rice. "Plants know how to grow," he would tell them. "Our job is to provide good conditions and then get out of the way." The farmer who tries to force faster growth often gets slower results than the farmer who learns to wait with wisdom. Master Tanaka, now in his 80s, would smile when he saw Hiroshi sitting peacefully beside his thriving fields. "You have learned the most important lesson a farmer can learn," he told him one evening. "That cooperation with nature is more powerful than trying to control it." Hiroshi's transformation from an anxious, controlling farmer to a patient, observant one illustrates another aspect of the effort versus allowing principle that runs through all Zen Buddhist teaching. Just as Kenji learned that spiritual awakening cannot be forced, Hiroshi discovered that natural processes unfold according to their own intelligence when we provide proper conditions and then trust rather than interfere. This understanding extends far beyond farming and meditation into every area of human life. Relationships cannot be forced to develop faster than their natural pace. Healing from illness or emotional trauma follows its own timeline that cannot be hurried through willpower alone. Even learning new skills requires a balance of appropriate effort and patient allowing for integration to occur. The bamboo teaching that Master Tanaka shared reveals something profound about how growth actually happens. The most dramatic periods of development often require long phases of invisible preparation. A student may study for months without feeling much progress, then suddenly experience rapid improvement when all their patient practice comes together. A person working through grief may feel stuck for a long time before experiencing a breakthrough in healing. In our culture, we often want everything to happen quickly and visibly. We measure progress constantly and become frustrated when change doesn't occur on our preferred timeline. But the masters of Zen Buddhism understood that the deepest transformations happen slowly and often invisibly, like bamboo developing its root system underground. Tonight, as you prepare for the natural restoration that sleep provides, you might reflect on areas of your life where you've been trying to force growth or change. Where have you been measuring progress too frequently, becoming frustrated with natural timing, or interfering with processes that would unfold more gracefully if left alone? This doesn't mean becoming passive or avoiding appropriate action. Hiroshi continued to water his crops and maintain his fields. but he learned the difference between helpful cultivation and anxious interference. He discovered that trust in natural processes often produces better results than constant control and manipulation. The rice that grows slowly in good soil develops stronger roots than rice that is forced to grow quickly in poor conditions. Similarly, the insights that arise naturally in a peaceful mind often prove more stable and transformative than understandings that are forced through intense mental effort. Both Kenji the monk and Hiroshi the farmer learned that their role was not to make things happen through force, but to create conditions where natural intelligence could express itself freely. In meditation, this means providing the conditions of stillness and attention while allowing awareness to reveal its own nature. In farming, it means providing good soil, water, and care while trusting plants to grow according to their own wisdom. As you settle into sleep tonight, you can practice this same principle. Your job is not to force sleep to occur, but to create conditions that support natural rest, a comfortable position, a quiet environment, and a peaceful mind. Then you can trust your body's ancient wisdom to guide you into the restoration you need. Let your breathing become even slower and deeper now. Feel your body releasing completely into relaxation. Notice how sleep, like enlightenment and like bamboo growth, cannot be forced but comes naturally when conditions are right and we stop interfering with the process. The sun melts ice through gentle radiance, not through struggle. Rice grows through patient unfolding, not through anxious pushing. Your own peace emerges through allowing rather than effort, through trust rather than control. Rest deeply in this understanding, knowing that the same natural intelligence that guides plants and planets is always available to guide your own journey toward freedom and peace. In Zen Buddhism, this principle of allowing rather than forcing extends to our entire approach to life and awakening. The path is not about becoming someone different through great effort, but about removing the obstacles that hide what we already are beneath all our trying. Like Kenji's awareness and Hiroshi's rice plants, your own deepest peace is already present, already growing, already perfect in its own natural timing. In a prosperous kingdom nestled between great rivers and fertile plains, there ruled a man named Emperor Akihiko, who possessed everything a person could reasonably want. His palace was magnificent, built from rare woods and decorated with treasures from across the known world. His gardens were famous for their beauty, designed by master craftsmen who had created landscapes that seemed to capture pieces of paradise on earth. Akihiko commanded the respect of neighboring rulers, the loyalty of his subjects, and the admiration of scholars and artists who traveled great distances to visit his court. His treasury was filled with gold and precious stones. His armies were strong and disciplined. His harvests were abundant year after year, ensuring that his people lived in prosperity and peace. Yet despite all these blessings, Emperor Akihiko felt a persistent emptiness that he could not understand or resolve. In quiet moments between the ceremonies and responsibilities of rulership, a question would arise in his mind that seemed to grow more urgent with each passing year. What is the real meaning of existence? What truth lies beneath all these temporary pleasures and achievements? This question began to haunt the emperor's days and disturb his nights. He would walk through his beautiful gardens in the evening, surrounded by flowering trees and the gentle sound of fountains, yet feeling as if something essential was missing from his life. He would sit in his luxurious chambers, looking out at his vast kingdom, and wonder if there was some deeper purpose to life that his wealth and power had somehow prevented him from discovering. Determined to find an answer, Emperor Akihiko summoned the wisest teachers from throughout his realm. Philosophers came from distant universities to share their theories about the nature of reality. Priests arrived from famous temples to explain their understanding of divine truth. Scholars brought ancient texts that promised to reveal the secrets of existence. Mystics offered complex practices that they claimed would lead to ultimate understanding. Each teacher spoke eloquently and at great length, presenting elaborate explanations and sophisticated concepts. But somehow, none of their words satisfied the deep longing in the emperor's heart. Their teachings felt like beautiful clothing that didn't quite fit, impressive structures that didn't quite shelter what he was seeking to protect. After months of these disappointing consultations, Emperor Akihiko had almost given up hope of ever finding a real answer to his question. Then one afternoon, as he sat alone in his private garden feeling discouraged about his failed search, a humble figure appeared at the garden gate. It was an old monk dressed in the simplest possible robes, brown cloth that had been patched and mended many times. His few possessions fit in a small cloth bag slung over his shoulder. His sandals were worn thin from long walking, and his face was weathered by years of exposure to sun and wind. Yet his eyes held a quality of peace and clarity that immediately caught the emperor's attention. "Your Majesty," the monk said, bowing respectfully but without the elaborate ceremony that court visitors usually displayed, "I have heard that you seek to understand the true nature of existence." Emperor Akihiko looked at this simple traveler with a mixture of hope and skepticism. After hearing from so many learned teachers, could this ordinary-looking monk possibly offer anything different? "Yes," the emperor replied cautiously. "I have been searching for this understanding for many months, but no one has been able to provide a satisfactory answer." The old monk smiled gently. "I cannot give you the answer you seek," he said, "but I can offer you something that will reveal it to you." Reaching into his small bag, the monk withdrew a plain wooden container about the size of a man's two hands held together. It was made from simple pine, smoothly polished but completely undecorated. A piece of hemp rope was tied around it, holding the lid securely in place. "This container holds the truth you are seeking," the monk said, offering it to the emperor. "But you must promise to open it only when you are truly ready to receive what is inside." Emperor Akihiko took the container, surprised by how light it felt in his hands. "How will I know when I am ready?" The monk's eyes twinkled with gentle wisdom. "You will know," he said simply. "Do not rush this moment. The truth inside will wait patiently for you to be prepared to receive it." With that, the old monk bowed once more and walked away, disappearing down the road that led away from the palace. Emperor Akihiko never saw him again, but he would remember that peaceful presence for the rest of his life. The emperor took the sealed container to his private chambers and placed it on a special stand beside his bed. For days, he stared at it with intense curiosity, his hands itching to untie the rope and discover what profound truth lay hidden inside. The container seemed to emanate a quiet mystery that filled his thoughts during the day and invaded his dreams at night. What could be inside something so small, yet supposedly so significant? Perhaps it contained a scroll with ancient wisdom written by enlightened masters. Maybe it held a sacred object that would instantly transform his understanding. It might contain some rare substance that would open his mind to higher truths. But something in the monk's voice held him back from opening it immediately. "Only when you are truly ready," the words echoed in his memory. What did it mean to be ready? How would he recognize this readiness when it came? Weeks passed, then months. The container remained sealed on its stand, becoming a constant presence in the emperor's daily life. He would touch it gently each morning when he woke and each evening before sleep, feeling its smooth wooden surface and wondering about its contents. Sometimes he would hold it to his ear, listening for any sound from within, but it remained completely silent. As time went on, Emperor Akihiko's life continued with its usual responsibilities and pleasures, but something had shifted in his relationship to these experiences. The presence of the sealed container had introduced a quality of patience and reflection that affected how he approached everything else. Instead of rushing through his days driven by ambition and desire, he began to move more slowly and observe more carefully. Years passed. The emperor aged, his hair growing grey and his face developing the lines that come from decades of both joy and sorrow. He witnessed the deaths of beloved advisors and the births of grandchildren. He saw his kingdom prosper and face challenges. He experienced personal losses that brought him to tears and moments of beauty that filled his heart with wonder. Through all these experiences, the sealed container remained unchanged on its stand, a silent witness to the passage of time and the unfolding of life. Emperor Akihiko would often look at it during difficult periods, drawing comfort from its steady presence and the promise it held of eventual understanding. One quiet winter evening, when the emperor was well into his 70s, he sat alone in his chambers watching snow fall past his window. The palace was peaceful, his kingdom was secure, and his family was healthy. Yet, as he looked at the sealed container in the soft lamplight, he felt a deep sense of completion that he had never experienced before. For the first time since receiving the container, Emperor Akihiko felt no urgent desire to discover its contents. He was no longer driven by the desperate seeking that had once consumed him. The question about the meaning of existence hadn't been answered, but somehow it no longer felt like a problem that needed solving. "Now," he whispered to himself, "I am ready." With hands that had grown gentle with age, Emperor Akihiko carefully untied the hemp rope that had secured the container for so many years. His heart beat steadily, but without the frantic excitement he had expected to feel at this moment. He lifted the wooden lid slowly and looked inside. The container was completely empty. At first, the emperor simply stared into the hollow space, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Had the monk deceived him? Was this some kind of joke? Had something been lost over the years? But as he continued looking into the empty container, something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of feeling disappointed or angry, Emperor Akihiko began to laugh. Not with bitterness or frustration, but with a joy so deep and pure that it seemed to come from the very core of his being. In that moment of seeing nothing, he understood everything. The truth he had been seeking was not something that could be contained in any object, no matter how precious or sacred. It was not hidden in texts or teachings or practices. It had been present in every moment of his searching, in every experience of his life, in every breath he had taken while wondering about the meaning of existence. The emptiness in the container was not the absence of truth, but the presence of something too vast and immediate to be captured or stored. The very awareness that could recognize emptiness, the consciousness that could feel disappointment or joy, the life force that had sustained his questioning for all these years, this was the truth he had been seeking. "In seeking truth, I found nothing," he said aloud to the quiet room. "And in finding nothing, I discovered everything." The emperor understood now why the monk had insisted he wait until he was ready. Earlier in his life, he would have seen only emptiness and felt cheated. But the years of patient waiting, of living fully while holding the question lightly, had prepared him to recognize what the emptiness actually revealed. From that night forward, Emperor Akihiko's relationship to life transformed completely. He continued to fulfill his duties as a ruler, but without the desperate need to find something beyond ordinary experience to make his life meaningful. He found profound satisfaction in simple moments: the taste of tea, conversations with friends, the sight of birds flying across the sky. When visitors came seeking wisdom, as they often did in his later years, Emperor Akihiko would sometimes show them the empty container. Most would look puzzled or disappointed, but occasionally someone would begin to laugh with the same recognition he had experienced. Those were the visitors who left his palace with their seeking transformed into simple appreciation for what had always been present. The emperor lived for many more years, and his reign was remembered as a time of unusual peace and prosperity. But those who knew him best said that his greatest achievement was not anything he accomplished as a ruler, but the quality of presence he had developed through learning to find everything in nothing. When Emperor Akihiko eventually died, peacefully in his sleep at a very advanced age, the empty container was found on the stand beside his bed, still open, still revealing its profound secret to anyone who had eyes to see it. His final written words, discovered in his personal journal, were, "The treasure I spent decades seeking was the very seeking itself. The peace I longed for was always here, waiting beneath my longing." This ancient story reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most transformative insights. What we seek is not hidden in some distant place or future moment, but present right here in our immediate experience. The emperor's years of patient waiting weren't preparation for finding truth, they were the truth itself, gradually recognized. Many of us approach spiritual seeking, happiness, or fulfillment the way the young emperor initially approached the sealed container, convinced that the answer lies somewhere else, in some special experience or understanding we haven't yet achieved. We believe that peace will come when we solve our problems, find the right relationship, achieve certain goals, or gain particular insights. But the empty container teaches us that what we truly seek, peace, completeness, the sense of being fundamentally okay, is not something we can acquire or achieve. It's the very awareness that recognizes all experiences, including the experience of seeking itself. This awareness has been here all along, as present during our searching as it will be during any moment of finding. The emperor's laughter when he saw the emptiness wasn't the laughter of someone who had been tricked, but the laughter of recognition. He finally understood that his years of questioning had been the answer, his seeking had been the finding, his life itself had been the truth he was looking for. Tonight, as you rest, you might gently consider what you've been seeking that may already be here. What peace are you hoping to find that could be present right now? What completeness are you working toward that might already be complete in this very moment of awareness? The empty container reminds us that the most profound truths often can't be grasped or stored, only recognized in the immediacy of present experience. Your awareness right now, reading these words, feeling your body, breathing naturally, this awareness is not separate from what you seek. It is what you seek, revealed not through finding something new, but through recognizing what has never been absent. In a mountain village where terraced gardens climbed the hillsides and ancient temples dotted the landscape, there lived a learned man named Takeshi, who had devoted his entire life to the study of Buddhist scriptures and philosophical texts. His modest house was filled floor to ceiling with books, scrolls, and handwritten notes that represented decades of careful research and scholarly work. Takeshi was respected throughout the region as one of the most knowledgeable students of Buddhist philosophy alive. Monks would travel for days to consult with him about difficult passages in ancient texts. University scholars sought his opinions on matters of interpretation and translation. His reputation for learning and wisdom had spread far beyond his small mountain community. But despite all his accumulated knowledge, Takeshi felt increasingly dissatisfied with his understanding of Buddhism's deeper meanings. He could explain complex philosophical concepts with great precision, but he sensed that something essential was missing from his purely intellectual approach to the teachings. The more he studied, the more he became convinced that there must be some special text, some hidden teaching, some secret knowledge that would finally complete his understanding and give him the direct experience of enlightenment that had somehow eluded him despite his years of careful study. Takeshi had heard legends of a mysterious text called the Sutra of Complete Understanding that was said to contain the final secrets of Buddhist realization. According to these stories, the sutra had been written by an enlightened master centuries ago and hidden away in a remote monastery to protect it from those who weren't ready to receive its powerful teachings. The legend claimed that anyone who read this text would immediately achieve perfect enlightenment, understanding in an instant what normally took lifetimes of practice to realize. Many scholars had searched for the sutra over the centuries, but none had ever found it or even proven that it actually existed. Despite the uncertain nature of these stories, Takeshi became obsessed with locating this legendary text. He spent months researching historical records, looking for any mention of where the sutra might be hidden. He interviewed elderly monks who might have heard stories about its location. He studied maps of ancient monasteries and planned expeditions to remote temples that might house such a precious document. Finally, after nearly a year of investigation, Takeshi discovered a reference in an obscure historical chronicle that suggested the Sutra of Complete Understanding might be hidden in a monastery built into the cliffs of a nearly inaccessible mountain peak 3 days' journey from his village. Without hesitation, Takeshi packed supplies for the difficult trek and set off toward the remote monastery. The journey was treacherous, requiring him to follow barely visible paths along steep mountainsides and cross rushing streams on fallen logs. His scholar's hands, soft from years of handling books rather than tools, became blistered and raw from gripping rocks and climbing ropes. When he finally reached the monastery, Takeshi was exhausted but filled with excitement. The building was indeed ancient, carved directly into the rock face of the mountain and accessible only by a narrow ledge that required careful navigation. Only 3 elderly monks lived there, maintaining the simple buildings and tending a small garden that somehow thrived despite the harsh conditions. The head monk, a man named Master Ryagan, who appeared to be at least 90 years old, welcomed Takeshi with genuine warmth despite his unexpected arrival. After providing food and a place to rest, Master Ryagan listened carefully as Takeshi explained his quest for the legendary sutra. "Ah," the old monk said with a gentle smile, "you seek the Sutra of Complete Understanding." "Yes, we do indeed have such a text here. It has been in our care for many generations." Takeshi's heart raced with excitement. After all his searching, all his difficult travel, he had actually found the legendary document that would complete his spiritual education. However, Master Ryagan continued, there are conditions for reading this sutra. It is not given lightly to anyone who asks. You must spend at least 1 month here in our community, participating in our daily practices and demonstrating your readiness to receive such profound teachings. Though eager to read the text immediately, Takeshi agreed to these terms. He had already invested so much time and effort in his quest that another month seemed reasonable if it meant finally achieving the complete understanding he had sought for so long. The daily routine at the mountain monastery was unlike anything Takeshi had experienced in his scholarly life. Each day began before dawn with sitting meditation in a small cave behind the main buildings. This was followed by simple work, tending the garden, maintaining the buildings, preparing meals, and copying texts for preservation. The work was humble and repetitive, very different from the intellectual stimulation of Takeshi's research. At first, he found it frustrating to spend his time on such mundane activities when the ultimate teaching was waiting just beyond his reach. His mind constantly wandered to thoughts of the precious sutra and what revelations it might contain. But as weeks passed, something unexpected began to happen. The simple rhythm of daily life at the monastery started to have a calming effect on Takeshi's restless mind. The hours of silent meditation gradually quieted the constant stream of thoughts and analysis that had dominated his consciousness for years. The physical work connected him to his body in a way that scholarly study never had. Most surprisingly, Takeshi found himself experiencing moments of profound peace and clarity that had nothing to do with reading or understanding anything. During morning meditation, awareness would sometimes expand beyond the boundaries of his usual thinking, revealing a spaciousness that felt more real and immediate than any concept he had ever studied. One evening near the end of his month-long stay, as Takeshi sat outside the monastery watching the sun set behind distant peaks, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his relationship to seeking and finding. The desperate hunger for more knowledge that had driven his quest for the legendary sutra had been replaced by a simple appreciation for the completeness of each moment. That night, Master Ryogan approached him with a knowing smile. "Tomorrow you will have been with us for exactly 1 month," the old monk said. "Are you ready to receive the Sutra of Complete Understanding?" "Yes, Master," Takeshi replied, though he noticed that his earlier excitement had been replaced by a curious sense of calm anticipation. The next morning, Master Ryogan led Takeshi to a special room deep within the monastery that served as a library and meditation hall. Ancient texts lined the walls, and the air was filled with the faint fragrance of incense that had been burned there for countless years. In the center of the room, on a simple wooden stand, sat an ornate box made from precious wood and decorated with intricate carvings. The Sutra of Complete Understanding, Master Ryogan announced solemnly, has been kept in this box for over 400 years, waiting for someone truly ready to receive its teachings. With great ceremony, the old monk opened the beautiful box and withdrew what appeared to be a scroll wrapped in the finest silk. He placed it carefully on a reading stand and gestured for Takeshi to approach. "You may now read the ultimate teaching," Master Ryogan said with deep respect. With hands that trembled slightly from anticipation, Takeshi unwrapped the silk covering and unrolled the ancient scroll. The paper was indeed very old, yellowed with age and delicate to the touch. But as he looked at the surface where the profound teachings should have been written, Takeshi saw that the scroll was completely blank. There was no text whatsoever. No words of wisdom, no secret teachings, no hidden knowledge. The legendary Sutra of Complete Understanding contained nothing but empty space. For a moment, Takeshi stared at the blank scroll in confusion. Had the writing faded over the centuries? Was this some kind of mistake? Had Master Ryogan given him the wrong document? But as he continued looking at the empty space where he had expected to find ultimate truth, something remarkable occurred. Instead of disappointment or anger, Takeshi began to laugh with the same deep recognition that Emperor Akihiko had experienced when he found his container empty. In that moment of seeing nothing written on the scroll, everything became clear. The complete understanding he had been seeking was not something that could be written down or transmitted through words. It was the very awareness that could recognize the blankness of the scroll, the consciousness that could feel disappointment and then transcend it, the life that had sustained his seeking all along. All his years of studying texts had been valuable, but they had never been the goal itself. The goal was the understanding that was present right here, right now, in the simple act of being aware. This understanding didn't need to be written down because it was already complete in every moment of conscious experience. The month you spent with us, Master Ryogen said gently, was the real sutra. The peace you discovered in meditation, the contentment you found in simple work, the clarity that emerged from quieting your restless mind, this was the teaching the blank scroll was waiting to reveal to you. Takeshi understood now why the monastery required seekers to spend time in practice before viewing the legendary text. Without the preparation of actually living a contemplative life, he would have seen only emptiness and felt cheated. But the month of simple practice had prepared him to recognize what the emptiness actually pointed toward. "Master," Takeshi said with deep gratitude, "I came here seeking a teaching that would complete my understanding, but I discovered that my understanding was already complete. I was looking for something to add to my knowledge, but what I needed was to subtract the seeking itself." Master Ryogen nodded with approval. "You have read the Sutra of Complete Understanding correctly. It has taught you what no written words could ever convey." When Takeshi returned to his village, his approach to Buddhist study was completely transformed. He continued reading and teaching, but no longer with the desperate hunger for some final revelation. He understood now that the deepest teachings were transmitted not through information, but through direct experience of what the information pointed toward. Students noticed the change in him immediately. Where once his teaching had been brilliant but somehow dry, now it carried a quality of presence and authenticity that touched people's hearts as well as their minds. When they asked him about this transformation, he would tell them about his journey to find the legendary sutra. "I traveled to the ends of the earth seeking ultimate truth," he would say, "and discovered that it was right here all along, closer than my own breath." The most profound teaching is often the recognition that we already understand everything we need to know. In his later years, Takeshi would sometimes take advanced students on the same difficult journey to the mountain monastery, preparing them for their own encounter with the blank scroll. Most who were ready for the teaching would have the same moment of laughing recognition he had experienced. They would return transformed, not by acquiring new knowledge, but by recognizing the completeness of what they already were. Both the emperor with his empty container and the scholar with his blank scroll discovered the same liberating truth. What we most deeply seek is not hidden somewhere else, waiting to be found, but present right here in our immediate experience, waiting to be recognized. This teaching strikes at the heart of how we typically approach spiritual growth, happiness, and fulfillment. We tend to believe that peace lies somewhere in the future, after we've solved our problems, achieved our goals, or gained particular insights. We search for the missing piece that will complete our understanding, or the special experience that will finally satisfy our longing. But Zen Buddhism suggests that this very searching often prevents us from recognizing what we already have. The awareness that seeks is the awareness that finds. The consciousness that feels incomplete is already complete in its capacity to experience incompleteness. The life that longs for meaning is already meaningful in its very ability to long. This doesn't mean we should stop growing, learning, or working toward positive changes in our lives. Takeshi continued his scholarly work, and the emperor continued ruling his kingdom. But both discovered that their deepest satisfaction came not from achieving something new, but from recognizing the fullness of what was already present. As you settle into sleep tonight, you might gently consider what you've been seeking that could already be here. What peace are you hoping to find in the future that might be available right now? What understanding are you working toward that could be present in this very moment of awareness? The blank scroll and empty container remind us that sometimes the most profound teachings come through subtraction rather than addition, through recognizing what we already are rather than trying to become something different. Your awareness right now, tired and ready for rest, is not lacking anything essential. The consciousness that experiences sleepiness, the life force that has carried you through this day, the simple presence that notices your breathing, this is not a stepping stone to something better. This is the destination itself, already complete, already perfect, already at peace. Let your body release completely now into the support beneath you. Feel your breathing slow and deepen naturally. Trust that the rest you seek is not something you must achieve, but something you can simply allow, knowing that the awareness that receives sleep is the same awareness that receives all experiences, complete, whole, and fundamentally at peace exactly as it is. In Zen Buddhism, this recognition that what we seek is what we already are is not the end of practice, but the beginning of authentic living. When we stop looking elsewhere for completion, we can finally appreciate the extraordinary ordinariness of each moment, finding infinite richness in the simple fact of being aware, being alive, being here now. High in the mountains where clouds drifted between ancient peaks and the air carried the scent of pine and mountain herbs, there stood a monastery known for the dedication of its students. Among these earnest practitioners lived a young monk named Jishin, who had been struggling with his meditation practice for many months. Jishin's problem was not lack of effort or commitment. He sat for hours each day in the meditation hall, his posture straight and his attention focused. He followed all the instructions he had received from his teachers. He studied the classical texts and participated faithfully in all the monastery's activities. Yet despite all his sincere efforts, inner peace seemed to elude him like water slipping through his fingers. The harder Jishin tried to achieve a calm mind, the more agitated his thoughts became. When he attempted to concentrate on his breathing, his mind would wander to concerns about whether he was breathing correctly. When he tried to empty his awareness of all thoughts, more thoughts would arise to fill the space. When he worked to maintain perfect posture, his body would become tense and uncomfortable. Most frustrating of all, Jishin would have brief moments during meditation when his mind would become naturally quiet and peaceful. But as soon as he noticed these states and tried to hold on to them, they would immediately disappear. The more desperately he reached for these experiences of calm, the more quickly they seemed to slip away. This pattern of grasping and losing began to dominate not just Jishin's meditation practice, but his entire approach to life. He would have pleasant conversations with other monks, then spend hours afterward trying to recreate the exact conditions that had made those interactions so enjoyable. He would experience moments of appreciation for the natural beauty around the monastery, then exhaust himself attempting to manufacture those same feelings of wonder. After one particularly frustrating meditation session where he had spent the entire hour fighting with his restless mind, Jishin decided to seek guidance from Master Sogen, the elderly teacher who was respected throughout the region for his deep understanding and gentle wisdom. Master Sogen lived in a small hut at the edge of the monastery grounds, surrounded by a simple garden where he grew vegetables and tended flowering plants. When Jishin approached his dwelling that afternoon, he found the old teacher sitting quietly outside, drinking tea and watching white clouds drift slowly across the blue sky. "Master," Jishin said, bowing respectfully and settling onto the ground beside the teacher's bench, "I need your help. I have been practicing meditation faithfully for many months, but I cannot seem to find the lasting peace that other students describe. Every time I experience a moment of calm, I try to hold on to it, but it disappears immediately. How can I learn to maintain peaceful states of mind?" Master Sogen continued looking up at the sky for a long moment before responding. When he finally spoke, he gestured toward a particularly beautiful cloud that was floating above them, its edges illuminated by the afternoon sunlight. "Look at that cloud," the master said gently. "Do you see how gracefully it moves across the sky?" Jishin looked up and admired the cloud's elegant shape and the way it seemed to glow with inner light. "Yes, master. It's very beautiful." "Tell me," Master Sogen continued, "is that cloud trying to hold on to the sky?" The question puzzled Jishin. "No, master. Clouds don't try to hold on to anything. They just float naturally." "And does the sky try to grasp the cloud and keep it in one place?" "No, the sky doesn't grasp anything either. It just allows the cloud to move through it." Master Sogen nodded approvingly. "Yet notice how perfectly they exist together. The cloud belongs completely to the sky, and the sky contains the cloud without effort. Neither needs to struggle or reach for the other." Jishin began to sense that this simple observation contained a teaching about his meditation difficulties, but he wasn't entirely sure how to apply it. "Your peaceful mind," Master Sogen explained, "is like the sky. And your thoughts and experiences are like clouds that pass through this sky. When you try to grasp the peaceful moments and make them permanent, you are like someone trying to capture clouds with their hands." The master picked up a handful of air and opened his palm, showing its obvious emptiness. "The harder you squeeze, the more surely whatever you're trying to hold will slip away." "But master," Jishin protested, "if I don't try to maintain peaceful states, won't I just lose them completely?" "Watch the cloud again," Master Sogen said, pointing to the same white formation that was now drifting toward the western horizon. "Is it lost because it's moving? Is its beauty diminished because it's not permanent?" As Jishin observed the cloud's gradual movement across the vast sky, he began to understand something profound. The cloud's beauty was not dependent on staying in one place. In fact, its graceful movement was part of what made it so lovely to watch. And the sky's spaciousness was not threatened by the cloud's eventual disappearance. The sky remained perfectly itself, whether it contained many clouds, few clouds, or no clouds at all. "The peace you seek," Master Sogen continued, "is not a particular state that comes and goes like a cloud. It is the sky itself, the spacious awareness that remains unchanged whether it contains peaceful thoughts or agitated thoughts, pleasant experiences or difficult ones." Over the following days, Jishin experimented with this new understanding during his meditation practice. Instead of trying to create peaceful states, he practiced resting in the awareness that could observe all states without being disturbed by them. Instead of grasping for calm experiences, he learned to appreciate the spaciousness that contained both calm and restlessness equally. The change in his practice was remarkable. When peaceful moments arose naturally, Jishin could enjoy them fully without the anxiety of trying to make them permanent. When agitated thoughts appeared, he could watch them pass through his awareness like clouds through sky, knowing that their presence didn't threaten his fundamental peace. One morning several weeks later, while sitting in meditation and watching thoughts arise and dissolve in the spaciousness of awareness, Jishin had a profound realization. He saw clearly that he had been seeking something he already possessed. The peaceful awareness he had been trying so hard to achieve was the very awareness that had been seeking peace all along. "I was like someone searching everywhere for their own eyes," he later told Master Sogen. "The peace I wanted was the peace I already was." From that day forward, Jishin's approach to meditation and life transformed completely. He continued his regular practice, but without the desperate grasping that had previously made it such a struggle. He could appreciate beautiful moments without trying to capture them, and weather difficult periods without feeling they threatened his essential well-being. Other monks began to notice the change in Jishin. Where once he had seemed tense and driven, now he moved with natural ease. His presence became calming to others, not because he was working to be peaceful, but because he had stopped interfering with the peace that was naturally present. Years later, when Jishin became a teacher himself, students would often come to him with the same grasping approach to meditation that had once caused him so much frustration. He would take them outside and point to the sky, sharing Master Sogen's teaching about clouds and space. "Stop trying to catch the wind," he would tell them, "and you will discover that you are the stillness through which all movement passes. Peace is not something you achieve, but something you already are when you stop trying to be something else." This simple teaching about clouds and sky reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most practical insights for daily life. We often approach happiness, love, success, and even spiritual growth with a grasping attitude, trying to capture and permanently possess experiences that are naturally fluid and changing. But just as clouds cannot be held without destroying their beauty, the experiences we most treasure often lose their magic when we try to grasp them too tightly. A peaceful moment becomes anxious when we worry about losing it. A joyful experience becomes desperate when we try to make it last forever. Love becomes possessive when we attempt to control it rather than allowing it to flow naturally. Jishin's discovery points to a different way of relating to our experiences. Instead of trying to be the cloud, we can learn to rest as the sky. Instead of identifying with the changing contents of our awareness, we can recognize ourselves as the awareness itself, which remains spacious and undisturbed regardless of what it contains. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to life's experiences. Clouds add beauty and variety to the sky, just as thoughts, emotions, and experiences add richness to our lives. But when we understand ourselves as the sky rather than the clouds, we can appreciate everything more fully because we're not desperately trying to control what naturally changes. In a bustling market town where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, there lived a man named Ryokan who owned nothing but the simple clothes on his back and a small wooden bowl for collecting food or alms. Most people in the town considered him one of the poorest individuals they had ever encountered, yet those who took time to observe him closely noticed something puzzling. Ryokan seemed happier and more content than many of the wealthy merchants and comfortable citizens around him. Ryokan had not always lived this way. Years earlier, he had been a successful rice trader with a thriving business, a large house, and a reputation for shrewd dealing that brought him considerable wealth. But a series of bad harvests, dishonest partners, and unfortunate investments had cost him everything. By the time his financial collapse was complete, he had lost not only his possessions, but also his wife, who left him for a more prosperous merchant, and most of his friends, who distanced themselves from his misfortune. What remained after this total loss was something Ryokan had never expected, a profound sense of freedom. Without possessions to protect, investments to worry about, or social status to maintain, he discovered a lightness and simplicity that he had never experienced during his years of prosperity. Each morning, Ryokan would wake wherever he had found shelter the night before, sometimes in the doorway of a closed shop, sometimes under the eaves of a temple, sometimes in a grove of trees outside the town. Instead of feeling miserable about his circumstances, he would stretch in the morning sunlight and feel genuinely grateful to be alive for another day. His daily routine was beautifully simple. He would walk through the town, offering to help shopkeepers with small tasks in exchange for food or a few coins. He might sweep in front of a tea house, carry heavy bags for elderly customers, or help merchants unload goods from their carts. The work was humble and the pay minimal, but Ryokan approached each task with such cheerfulness and skill that people began to seek him out specifically. What struck everyone who encountered Ryokan was his complete absence of bitterness or self-pity. He never complained about his poverty or spoke longingly about his former wealth. He never seemed envious of those who had more than he did or resentful toward those whose poor decisions had contributed to his downfall. Instead, he moved through his simple life with a quality of presence and appreciation that was rare even among people with every comfort. One day, a wealthy merchant named Watanabe, who had known Ryokan during his prosperous years, encountered him sweeping the entrance to a noodle shop. Watanabe felt uncomfortable seeing his former business associate in such reduced circumstances and approached him with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Ryokan," Watanabe said, his voice heavy with sympathy, "I am so sorry to see how far you have fallen. This must be terribly difficult for you, living like this after having so much. How do you bear such poverty and hardship?" Ryokan paused in his sweeping and looked at Watanabe with eyes that held no trace of sadness or shame. "Fallen?" he said with genuine puzzlement. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Watanabe gestured toward Ryokan's worn clothing and simple possessions. "Surely you must miss your comfortable house, your successful business, the respect you once commanded in this town. Don't you long to return to your former life?" Ryokan considered this question carefully, leaning on his broom handle and looking thoughtfully at the busy street around them. "Tell me, Watanabe, do you remember how I was during those prosperous years? Do you recall what my daily life was actually like?" Watanabe thought back to his memories of Ryokan as a wealthy merchant. "Well, you were successful and respected. You had fine clothes and ate at the best restaurants. People sought your advice on business matters." "Yes," Ryokan nodded. "But do you remember how I felt? Do you recall my state of mind during those years?" As Watanabe searched his memory more carefully, he began to remember details he had forgotten. Ryokan, as a wealthy man, had been constantly anxious about his investments, perpetually worried about competition from other traders, and frequently angry when deals didn't work out as planned. He had often complained about the stress of managing his business and the difficulty of knowing who his real friends were among those who sought his favor. "I suppose you did seem rather stressed and worried much of the time," Watanabe admitted. Ryokan smiled gently. "I was miserable, my friend. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I spent every day afraid of losing it. I worried constantly about the future, regretted past decisions, and was never able to simply enjoy the present moment. I was wealthy in possessions, but poor in peace." He gestured to the simple scene around them, the warm sunlight on the street, the pleasant sounds of people going about their daily business, the satisfying work of making something clean and orderly. "Now look at my life," Ryokan continued. "I have no possessions to protect, no investments to worry about, no complex relationships to manage. When I'm hungry, I find food. When I'm tired, I rest. When work needs to be done, I do it with full attention. When the day is beautiful, I appreciate its beauty completely. I have never been richer in the things that actually matter." Watanabe struggled to understand this perspective. "But surely you must feel insecure without money or property. How can you be content when you don't know where your next meal will come from or where you'll sleep tonight?" "Watch," Ryokan said, pointing to a sparrow that had landed nearby and was pecking at crumbs that had fallen from someone's meal. "Does that bird seem worried about where it will find food tomorrow? Does it appear anxious about not having a permanent home?" "No," Watanabe replied, "but that's just a bird. Humans have more complex needs." "Do we?" Ryokan asked. "Or do we have more complex fears? That sparrow needs food, shelter, and safety just as I do. The difference is that the sparrow doesn't spend its energy worrying about needs that aren't present in this moment. It doesn't exhaust itself planning for disasters that may never occur." Over the following months, Watanabe found himself observing Ryokan more carefully whenever their paths crossed in the town. He began to notice details that challenged his assumptions about poverty and prosperity. He saw that Ryokan ate his simple meals with greater appreciation than most wealthy people brought to their elaborate banquets. He observed that Ryokan slept more peacefully under the stars than many rich merchants slept in their comfortable beds, tossing and turning with worry about their businesses. He noticed that Ryokan's friendships, though few, were deeper and more genuine than the complex web of obligations and calculations that characterized most business relationships. Most remarkably, Watanabe began to see that Ryokan possessed a quality of presence and joy that made him genuinely attractive to others, not because of what he could provide them, but simply because of who he was. Children would run to greet him when they saw him in the street. Elderly people would seek out his company for conversation. Even other merchants, despite his poverty, would pause in their busy lives to exchange friendly words with him. One evening, Watanabe encountered Ryokan sitting beside the river that flowed past the town, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Watanabe sat down beside him. "Ryokan," he said, "I have been thinking about our conversation many weeks ago. I must admit that I don't understand how you can be so content with so little. Can you help me understand what I'm missing?" Ryokan continued watching the changing colors in the sky as he replied, "What do you think I lack right now, in this moment?" Watanabe looked around at the simple scene, two men sitting by a river, watching a beautiful sunset. "Well, you don't have a house to return to, fine food waiting for dinner, comfortable beds to sleep in, or money in your pocket." "True," Ryokan agreed, "but I also don't have mortgage payments to worry about, business problems keeping me awake at night, employees depending on me for their livelihood, or the constant pressure to maintain an image of success. And right now, I have everything I actually need: a healthy body, a peaceful mind, and one of the most beautiful sunsets I have ever witnessed." He turned to look directly at Watanabe. "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you sat still long enough to really watch a sunset? When did you last feel completely satisfied with a simple moment like this?" Watanabe realized with some embarrassment that he couldn't remember the last time he had done either of those things. His life was so filled with activities and concerns that he rarely paused to appreciate simple pleasures, and his mind was so focused on acquiring more or protecting what he had that satisfaction always seemed just out of reach. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Watanabe said slowly. "You're saying that contentment doesn't depend on having particular things, but on appreciating what's already present." "Exactly," Ryokan replied. "I spent years thinking that happiness would come when I had enough money, enough success, enough security. But enough kept changing as my circumstances changed. There was always something more I needed before I could be truly content." The sun had now set completely, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "When I lost everything I thought I needed for happiness," Ryokan continued, "I discovered that happiness had been available all along. It wasn't hidden in my possessions or my achievements. It was right here, in the simple fact of being alive and aware in this moment." From that evening forward, Watanabe's perspective on wealth and poverty began to shift dramatically. He started taking time each day to appreciate simple pleasures that he had previously taken for granted. The taste of his morning tea, the feeling of sunlight on his face, the satisfaction of completing a day's work well. He also began to notice how much of his life energy was consumed by anxiety about protecting and increasing his wealth, and how this constant worry prevented him from enjoying what he already had. Gradually, he learned to hold his possessions more lightly, appreciating them when they were present, but not allowing his happiness to depend entirely on keeping them. Years later, when people would ask Watanabe about the source of the greater contentment and wisdom they observed in him, he would tell them about the lessons he learned from a beggar who was richer than any wealthy man he had ever known. "True prosperity," he would say, "is not having everything you want, but wanting nothing more than what you have." Ryokan's story reveals another facet of the peace that needs nothing. While Jishin learned not to grasp for particular mental states, Ryokan discovered that contentment doesn't depend on external circumstances being arranged in any particular way. Both teachings point to the same fundamental insight of Zen Buddhism, that our deepest satisfaction comes not from getting what we think we need, but from recognizing the completeness that's already present in simple awareness itself. This understanding challenges one of the most persistent beliefs in human culture, that happiness depends on having the right combination of external conditions. We tend to think that we'll be content when we have enough money, the right relationship, better health, more success, or fewer problems. But both the cloud-watching monk and the contented beggar discovered that peace is available right now, independent of whether our circumstances match our preferences. This doesn't mean we should stop working toward reasonable goals or taking care of our practical needs. Jishin continued his meditation practice, and Ryokan continued seeking food and shelter. But both learned that their fundamental well-being didn't depend on these activities succeeding in any particular way. The sparrow that Ryokan pointed to offers a perfect example of this principle. Birds work diligently to find food and build nests, but they don't seem to suffer from anxiety about whether their efforts will be successful. They respond appropriately to their immediate needs, without exhausting themselves with worry about distant possibilities. Human beings have the unique gift of being able to plan for the future and learn from the past, but this same capacity can become a source of suffering when we use it to constantly compare our present circumstances to imagined alternatives. We can spend so much energy wishing things were different that we miss the beauty and sufficiency of what's actually here. As you settle deeper into rest tonight, you might gently notice what you've been waiting for in order to be content. What conditions do you believe need to be met before you can truly relax and feel satisfied? See if you can practice Ryokan's discovery, finding completeness in this simple moment of rest, independent of whether tomorrow brings what you hope for or prefer. Both stories in tonight's teaching point to the same liberating truth. The peace you seek doesn't need to be earned, achieved, or acquired. It's the natural state of awareness when it stops reaching for something else, stops grasping for different conditions, stops waiting for a better moment to be satisfied. Like the sky that contains all clouds without being disturbed by any of them, like the sparrow that meets each moment's needs without anxiety about the future, your own deepest peace is always available, needing nothing added to be complete. Let your breathing slow even more now. Feel your body releasing completely into the support beneath you. Rest in the awareness that needs no particular experience to be at peace, that finds sufficiency in the simple fact of being aware, being alive, being here now. In Zen Buddhism, this recognition that peace needs nothing is not a philosophy to believe, but a reality to experience directly. Tonight, as sleep comes naturally without your effort or control, you can practice this same trust in the completeness of each moment, knowing that awareness itself is already whole, already satisfied, already home. In a rural valley where rice fields stretched between rolling hills and the seasons followed their ancient rhythm, there lived a farmer named Ichiro who had worked the same land for over 40 years. His fields had been passed down through generations of his family, and he knew every inch of the soil as intimately as he knew the lines on his own weathered hands. Ichiro was respected throughout the region not only for his skill as a farmer, but for something more unusual, his remarkable equanimity in the face of whatever weather and circumstances each season brought. While other farmers in the valley would become anxious during droughts, angry during floods, and despairing when insects destroyed their crops, Ichiro seemed to maintain the same calm presence whether his harvests were abundant or meager. This steadiness had not always been part of Ichiro's character. In his younger years, he had been as reactive as any other farmer to the unpredictable challenges of agricultural life. A late spring frost that damaged his seedlings would send him into days of bitter complaints about his bad luck. A summer drought would keep him awake at night, worrying about his family's financial security. Heavy rains that flooded his fields would trigger outbursts of anger at the unfairness of nature. The transformation in Ichiro's character had begun 20 years earlier, during what the local people still remembered as the worst growing season in living memory. That year, every possible agricultural disaster had seemed to strike his valley in succession, as if nature were testing the limits of human endurance. The season had started with a late, harsh winter that prevented proper soil preparation. When spring finally arrived, it brought flooding that washed away many of the seeds Ichiro had managed to plant. The floods were followed by an unusual cold snap that killed most of the seedlings that had survived the water damage. Summer brought the opposite extreme, a severe drought that lasted for months, withering the few plants that had managed to establish themselves. When the rains finally returned in early autumn, they came with violent storms that included hail large enough to destroy whatever crops had somehow endured the earlier challenges. By harvest time, Ichiro had lost nearly everything. His rice yield was less than 10% of a normal year, barely enough to feed his family through the winter, with nothing left over to sell or save for the following season's planting. Many farmers in the valley faced similar losses, and the community was gripped by anxiety about how they would survive the coming year. On the day when Ichiro walked through his devastated fields, surveying the full extent of the damage, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling the rage and despair that had characterized his responses to much smaller setbacks in previous years, he found himself experiencing a profound sense of acceptance. Looking at the flattened stalks of rice that represented months of careful work, Ichiro felt his heart open in a way it never had before. He saw clearly that his anger and resistance to previous difficulties had never changed the circumstances themselves, but had only added mental suffering to whatever practical challenges he faced. "The rain falls where it falls," he said quietly to himself as he stood in his ruined field. "The sun shines when it shines. The seasons follow their own rhythm, not mine. I can work skillfully with whatever conditions arise, but I cannot control what conditions will arise." This simple recognition became the foundation for a completely different approach to farming and living. Instead of fighting against weather patterns he couldn't influence, Ichiro learned to observe them carefully and adapt his methods accordingly. Instead of becoming emotionally devastated by crop failures, he began to see them as information about what adjustments might be needed for future seasons. The change in Ichiro's approach became evident to his neighbors during the growing seasons that followed. When drought conditions developed, instead of cursing the lack of rain, Ichiro would calmly implement water conservation measures and choose crops that thrived in dry conditions. When excessive rainfall threatened to flood his fields, rather than raging against the weather, he would work efficiently to create drainage and protect what could be protected. Most remarkably, Ichiro's overall productivity actually improved after he stopped fighting against circumstances he couldn't control. By accepting whatever weather conditions arose and adapting skillfully to them, he was able to make better decisions and use his energy more effectively than when he had wasted time and emotional resources on resistance and complaint. One particular incident became famous throughout the valley and established Ichiro's reputation for wisdom as well as farming skill. 3 years after his season of great loss, another severe drought struck the region. Wells ran dry, streams stopped flowing, and most farmers watched helplessly as their crops withered under the relentless Sunday. While his neighbors gathered in anxious groups to discuss the disaster and voice their frustrations with the weather, Ichiro spent his time quietly implementing a plan he had developed during previous dry spells. He had learned to collect and store rainwater during abundant seasons, had planted drought-resistant varieties of vegetables in addition to rice, and had developed relationships with farmers in other regions who might trade different types of crops. When a delegation of worried farmers came to Ichiro seeking advice about the drought, they found him working peacefully in his fields, tending plants that, while not thriving, were surviving better than most crops in the area. "Ichiro," said Tanaka, a farmer whose fields bordered Ichiro's land, "how can you be so calm when this drought is destroying everyone's livelihood? Aren't you worried about your family's survival?" Ichiro paused in his work and gestured toward the clear blue sky above them. "Tanaka, does my worry make it rain?" "Well, no," Tanaka replied, "but surely you must be concerned about the practical consequences of this dry weather." "I am very concerned about the practical consequences," Ichiro agreed. "That's why I'm spending my time and energy on practical responses, conserving water, protecting the plants that can survive, and planning for various possible outcomes. But I'm not wasting energy on wishing the weather were different." He pointed to a section of his field where drought-resistant vegetables were growing in carefully mulched rows. "When I accept that this is a dry year, I can focus completely on how to farm successfully in dry conditions. When I spend my energy fighting against the dryness, I have less attention available for working skillfully with the conditions that actually exist. Another farmer in the group, an elderly man named Yamamoto, shook his head in puzzlement. But doesn't such acceptance mean giving up? If we just accept everything that happens, won't we become passive and stop trying to improve our situation? Ichiro smiled and invited the group to walk with him through his fields. As they toured his land, he showed them the various adaptations he had made in response to different weather patterns over the years. Terraced areas for managing heavy rains, drought-resistant crops for dry seasons, cold-hardy varieties for harsh winters, and flexible irrigation systems that could be adjusted for different conditions. As you can see, Ichiro explained, acceptance doesn't mean doing nothing. It means putting all my energy into responding wisely to what is actually happening, rather than dividing my energy between useful action and useless resistance. He stopped beside a small grove of trees he had planted to provide windbreak and shade. These trees exist because I accepted that this area of my land is exposed to strong winds and hot Sunday. If I had spent years complaining about the wind and sun, I would never have thought to plant trees. Acceptance allowed me to see clearly what was needed. Over time, other farmers in the valley began to adopt Ichiro's approach to agricultural challenges. They learned to observe weather patterns without emotional reactivity, to plan for various contingencies without anxiety, and to adapt their methods based on actual conditions rather than ideal preferences. The practical benefits of this approach became clear during subsequent difficult seasons. The farmers who learned to accept and work with challenging conditions consistently achieved better outcomes than those who wasted energy fighting against what they couldn't control. But beyond the practical improvements, those who adopted Ichiro's philosophy reported something even more valuable, a profound reduction in the stress and emotional suffering that had previously accompanied every agricultural challenge. When a traveling Buddhist monk visited the valley and heard stories about Ichiro's wisdom, he sought out the farmer to learn more about his philosophy. He found Ichiro working peacefully in his fields on a day when threatening clouds suggested an approaching storm. "I have heard that you have learned to maintain peace of mind regardless of what circumstances arise," the monk said. "Can you share the secret of this contentment?" Ichiro looked up at the gathering clouds and then at the monk. "There is no secret," he replied simply. "I just stopped arguing with reality." "What do you mean by arguing with reality?" "For many years," Ichiro explained, "whenever something happened that I didn't like, I would spend my energy wishing it were different. Drought should be rain. Floods should be sunshine. Cold should be warm. I was like a person shouting at the mountains to move because they were blocking his view. As they spoke, the first drops of rain began to fall. Ichiro smiled and continued working, adjusting his movements to account for the changing conditions, but showing no sign of distress about the approaching storm. Now when drought comes, I think, this is a dry year. How can I farm successfully in dry conditions? When floods come, I think, this is a wet year. How can I work skillfully with abundant water? When storms come, he gestured at the darkening sky. I think, this is a stormy day. How can I protect my crops and complete my work safely in these conditions? The monk nodded with understanding. You have learned what we call in Buddhism accepting what is. This doesn't mean you like everything that happens, but that you stop wasting energy fighting against what has already occurred. Exactly, Ichiro agreed as they hurried toward shelter from the increasing rain. I have learned that there are two kinds of pain in life: the pain of difficult circumstances and the additional pain of resisting those circumstances. I cannot always avoid the first kind of pain, but I can always choose to avoid the second. Years later, when Ichiro had become an elder respected throughout the region for his wisdom as well as his farming expertise, young people would come to him seeking guidance, not just about agriculture, but about life in general. His teachings were simple but profound. Life will bring you weather you didn't order, he would tell them. The question is not how to control the weather, but how to dance with whatever weather comes. When you stop fighting against the rhythm of life, you can discover your own natural rhythm within it. Ichiro's story illustrates one of Zen Buddhism's most practical and healing teachings: the difference between pain and suffering. Pain comes from difficult circumstances that we cannot always avoid. Suffering comes from our resistance to those circumstances, our insistence that reality should be different than it is. The farmer's transformation shows us that acceptance is not passive resignation, but active wisdom. When Ichiro stopped wasting energy on fighting against weather patterns, he had more energy available for intelligent responses to whatever conditions actually existed. His acceptance allowed him to see clearly and act effectively, rather than being clouded by emotional reactivity. This principle applies to every area of human experience. We cannot control many of the circumstances that shape our lives: the behavior of other people, unexpected changes in our health or finances, global events that affect our communities, or even our own emotional reactions to stress. But we can always choose how we relate to these uncontrollable circumstances. When we fight against what has already happened, we add mental and emotional suffering to whatever practical challenges we face. When we accept what is while working skillfully with present conditions, we often discover resources and possibilities that resistance had hidden from our view. This doesn't mean we should never work to change difficult situations or that we should become indifferent to injustice and unnecessary suffering. Ichiro continued to farm actively and sought to improve his methods. But he learned to distinguish between useful action and useless resistance, between responding to reality and arguing with it. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might gently notice what aspects of your current situation you've been fighting against. What circumstances have you been wishing were different, perhaps burning energy on resistance that could be directed towards skillful response? See if you can practice Ichiro's wisdom, accepting what is while remaining fully engaged with life as it actually unfolds. At a mountain monastery where winter brought months of deep snow and bitter cold, there lived a young student named Sato who had been struggling with periods of deep melancholy and emotional darkness that seemed to descend upon him without warning or apparent cause. These episodes would arrive like sudden weather changes, transforming Sato's normally cheerful disposition into something heavy and grey. During these times, he would lose interest in his studies, find no pleasure in activities he usually enjoyed, and feel as though a thick fog had settled over his mind, making even simple tasks feel overwhelming and difficult. Sato had tried many approaches to combat these dark moods. He would force himself to maintain his usual schedule, hoping that activity would lift his spirits. He would attempt to think positive thoughts, trying to argue his way out of the melancholy through logic and willpower. He would sometimes isolate himself completely, believing that solitude would allow the darkness to pass more quickly. None of these strategies seemed to help. In fact, his efforts to fight against the dark periods often seemed to make them worse, adding frustration and self-criticism to the already difficult experience of feeling emotionally heavy and disconnected. The monastery where Sato lived was known for its wise and compassionate teachers, but he felt embarrassed about his struggles with melancholy. In a community dedicated to cultivating peace and joy, he worried that his periodic darkness indicated some fundamental failure in his spiritual development. Master Daisetsu, the elderly abbot of the monastery, was renowned for his deep understanding of the human mind and heart. Students from many regions sought his guidance for dealing with difficult emotions and mental states. But Sato had always hesitated to approach him, fearing that the master would judge his struggles as evidence of inadequate practice or commitment. One winter morning, during a particularly intense period of melancholy that had lasted for several weeks, Sato was walking slowly through the monastery's snow-covered gardens when he encountered Master Daisetsu sitting peacefully on a bench, apparently enjoying the cold, clear air and the beauty of the snow-laden trees. "Good morning, Sato," the master said with warmth that contrasted sharply with the young man's inner gloom. "Come sit with me and watch the snow fall." Sato approached hesitantly and settled beside the master on the cold wooden bench. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching large snowflakes drift down from the grey sky and settle on the branches of the pine trees around them. "Master," Sato finally said, his voice heavy with the weight he had been carrying, "I must ask for your guidance. I have been practicing here for 3 years, but I still experience periods of darkness that seem to come from nowhere and resist all my efforts to overcome them. I fear that I am not suited for this path, or that some flaw in my character prevents me from finding the lasting peace that other students achieve." Master Daisetsu continued watching the falling snow as he replied, "Tell me, Sato, what do you think of this winter weather?" The question puzzled Sato. "I'm not sure what you mean, Master. Do you think this snow is a mistake? Do you believe winter is a flaw in the natural order that should be corrected?" "No, of course not," Sato replied. "Winter is natural. Snow is beautiful in its own way. And yet," Master Daisetsu observed, "winter is cold and dark. It covers the green earth with white emptiness. It strips the trees of their leaves and forces plants into dormancy. If you were a farmer concerned only with growing crops, you might consider winter a terrible inconvenience that prevents you from doing what you want to do." Sato began to sense that this conversation about weather was actually about something else, but he wasn't sure how to make the connection. "However," the master continued, "wise farmers understand that winter serves essential purposes in the cycle of growth. The cold period allows trees and plants to rest and gather energy for spring's renewal. The snow provides water that will nourish new growth when temperatures rise. The dormancy period is not a failure of the natural system, but an integral part of its wisdom." Master Daisetsu turned to look directly at Sato. "What if your periods of melancholy are like winter in the landscape of your inner life?" This comparison stopped Sato short. He had never thought of his dark moods as anything other than problems to be solved or obstacles to be overcome. The idea that they might serve some purpose or be part of a natural cycle had never occurred to him. "I don't understand, Master. How can depression and sadness be useful or natural? Think about what happens during winter," Master Daisetsu suggested. "The external world becomes quiet and still. Growth slows down or stops entirely. There is a turning inward, a period of rest and reflection that prepares for future expansion. Is it possible that your melancholy serves similar functions?" Over the following days, Sato began to observe his dark moods differently, trying to understand what Master Daisetsu had suggested. Instead of immediately fighting against the heaviness when it arose, he experimented with allowing it to be present while paying attention to what it might be teaching him. To his surprise, he began to notice that his periods of melancholy often coincided with times when he had been pushing himself too hard in his studies or spiritual practice. The darkness seemed to force him to slow down, to rest, to look more deeply at patterns in his life that might need attention. He also observed that during these quiet, inward times, he often gained insights about himself and his relationships that were not available during his more energetic and outward-focused periods. The melancholy, while uncomfortable, seemed to create a space for reflection and deeper understanding. Most importantly, Sato began to notice that when he stopped fighting against his dark moods, they seemed to pass more naturally and completely. Just as winter always gives way to spring, his periods of emotional darkness would eventually lift on their own, often leaving him with a sense of renewal and clarity that he hadn't experienced when he was constantly battling against the darkness. One morning, several months later, as winter was beginning to give way to the earliest signs of spring, Sato found himself emerging from a period of melancholy with a quality of lightness and appreciation that felt genuinely transformed by his new understanding. He sought out Master Daisetsu to share what he had learned. He found the master in the same garden where their conversation about winter had taken place, but now the snow was melting and small green shoots were beginning to emerge from the previously frozen ground. "Master," Sato said, settling beside his teacher, "I think I understand now what you meant about winter and melancholy. When I stopped trying to force my sad moods away and instead learned to rest in them like trees rest in winter, something shifted. The darkness began to feel less like an enemy and more like a teacher." Master Daisetsu smiled with approval. "And what has this teacher shown you?" "It has shown me that I don't have to be afraid of difficult emotions," Sato replied. "When I welcome sadness with the same acceptance that the earth welcomes winter, it can do its work and then pass naturally. When I fight against it, I get stuck in resistance that prolongs the very experience I'm trying to avoid." He pointed to the emerging green shoots around them. "I also learned that periods of inner quiet and darkness often precede new growth, just like winter prepares for spring. Some of my most important insights and creative inspirations have come during or just after times when I felt most empty and lost." "Yes," Master Daisetsu agreed. "You have discovered that the full spectrum of human emotional experience has its place in a life well lived. Just as a landscape needs both summer and winter to maintain its health and beauty, your inner life benefits from the full range of seasons." Over the following years, as Sato continued his practice at the monastery, his relationship with difficult emotions became one of his greatest strengths as a student and eventually as a teacher. He learned to welcome sadness, anxiety, anger, and confusion with the same openness that he brought to joy, peace, love, and clarity. This didn't mean that difficult emotions became pleasant or that he looked forward to periods of struggle. But he no longer added suffering to pain by fighting against what was naturally arising in his consciousness. Like a skilled gardener who works harmoniously with all seasons, Sato learned to find appropriate responses to whatever emotional weather was present. When other students came to him struggling with their own difficult emotions, he would share the wisdom of winter acceptance. "Don't try to skip winter and go straight to spring," he would tell them. "Winter has its own gifts and its own necessity. When you learn to rest in darkness as peacefully as you rest in light, you discover that your true nature is the awareness that remains unchanged through all seasons of experience." Sato's story reveals another dimension of the acceptance that Zen Buddhism teaches. While Ichiro learned to accept external circumstances beyond his control, Sato discovered how to embrace the internal weather of emotions and mental states that arise without our choosing. Many of us have been taught to view difficult emotions as problems that need to be fixed immediately. We live in a culture that often treats sadness, anxiety, anger, or confusion as signs of failure or dysfunction, rather than natural responses to the challenges and changes that life brings. But just as winter serves essential functions in the natural world, difficult emotions often carry important information and serve necessary purposes in our psychological and spiritual development. Sadness can help us process loss and change. Anxiety can alert us to genuine concerns that need attention. Anger can signal when our boundaries are being violated. Confusion can indicate that we're encountering something new that requires deeper understanding. The key insight that Sato discovered is that fighting against difficult emotions often prolongs and intensifies them. When we try to force ourselves out of sadness or push away anxiety through sheer willpower, we often create additional layers of frustration and self-criticism that make the original difficulty worse. Acceptance of emotional states doesn't mean we become passive or stop taking care of our mental health. Just as farmers continue to work skillfully during winter while accepting the season's limitations, we can take appropriate action to support ourselves during difficult emotional periods while allowing the experience to unfold naturally. This might mean seeking professional help when depression becomes severe, practicing stress reduction techniques during anxious periods, or expressing anger in healthy ways when it arises. But it also means trusting that emotional weather, like atmospheric weather, has its own natural cycles that don't require our constant management and control. Tonight, as you prepare for the rest your body and mind need, you might practice both forms of acceptance that these stories illustrate. Notice any external circumstances from your day that you've been resisting, and see if you can release the struggle against what has already occurred. Also, observe any internal states that you've been fighting against, and experiment with offering them the same welcoming space that winter offers to dormant seeds. Both Ichiro and Sato discovered that acceptance is not surrender, but wisdom, not giving up, but giving in to the natural flow of life. When we stop expending energy on fighting against what is already present, that energy becomes available for creativity, healing, and authentic response to whatever each moment offers. Let your breathing become even slower and deeper now. Feel your body settling completely into relaxation. Rest in the understanding that this moment, exactly as it is, with whatever thoughts or feelings or circumstances it contains, is perfectly acceptable. You don't need to change anything about your current experience to be worthy of rest and peace. In Zen Buddhism, this acceptance is sometimes called just this. Not just this, but it should be different, or just this, and I'll work to change it tomorrow, but simply just this. The remarkable discovery that both farmers and monks have made throughout history is that just this is always enough, always complete, always worthy of our full presence and acceptance. Sleep peacefully in this understanding, knowing that whatever dreams or rest or experiences the night brings, your fundamental nature remains like the awareness that observes all seasons without being changed by any of them. This awareness needs no improvement, no adjustment, no different circumstances to be perfectly itself. The acceptance that brings deepest peace is not the acceptance of resignation, but the acceptance of love, meeting life with the same unconditional welcome that space offers to all the various forms that arise within it. finding in this welcome the freedom to respond wisely to whatever each moment presents. In a peaceful valley where a small temple sat beside terraced fields and bamboo groves, the morning had started with the rumble of thunder echoing through the mountains. Dark clouds had gathered before dawn, and lightning had split the sky several times before the storm moved on, leaving the air fresh and clear. Brother Shinran had been sweeping the temple courtyard when the thunder rolled through the valley. Not long after the storm passed, the quiet was suddenly shattered by the thundering sound of hooves. He looked up to see a magnificent horse racing past the temple gates. The animal was running at full speed, its powerful legs carrying it swiftly down the dirt path that wound through the valley. Dust clouds rose behind it as it galloped, and its breathing was labored from the intensity of its pace. The horse's eyes were wide, almost frantic, foam on its mouth, as if it were fleeing from some terrible danger or racing towards some urgent destination. Shinran watched in amazement as the beautiful creature disappeared around a bend in the path, heading toward the mountains beyond. He had never seen a horse run with such desperate intensity, such single-minded focus on getting somewhere else as quickly as possible. A few moments later, Master Aizen emerged from the temple and noticed Shinran standing motionless, still staring down the path where the horse had vanished. "What has captured your attention so completely?" the master asked gently. "Master," Shinran replied, still somewhat breathless from witnessing the dramatic scene, "a magnificent horse just ran past our temple at incredible speed. It seemed so determined, so focused on reaching its destination. Where do you think it was going?" Master Aizen looked thoughtfully down the empty path, then back at his student with eyes that held both compassion and gentle amusement. "The horse doesn't know where it's going," he said simply. Shinran looked puzzled. "But Master, it was running so purposefully, with such intensity. Surely it must have been heading somewhere important." "It was running," Master Aizen agreed, "but not because it had chosen a destination. Earlier this morning, there was thunder in the mountains. That sound frightened one horse, which began to run. When other horses saw it running, they started running too, not knowing why, but assuming there must be danger. Now this horse runs because it has learned that when uncertain, the thing to do is run. It runs because all the other horses are running." He paused, watching a cloud drift peacefully overhead. "But the thunder has long since passed. There is no danger. There is nowhere urgent to go. The horse simply doesn't know how to stop running once it has started." The master gestured toward the peaceful temple grounds around them. "Tell me, Shinran, in this moment, do you know where you need to go?" Shinran considered the question. "No, Master. I am here, doing the work that needs to be done here." "Yet how often does your mind run like that horse? How often do your thoughts race from one concern to another, not because there's somewhere they need to go, but simply because thinking has become a habit that doesn't know how to stop?" This question struck Shinran with unexpected force. As he reflected on Master Aizen's words, he began to recognize a familiar pattern in his own mental activity. Even during quiet moments like sweeping the courtyard, his mind was often racing through plans for the day, memories of yesterday's conversations, worries about future events, or random thoughts that seemed to arise and chase each other endlessly. "I think I understand, Master," Shinran said slowly. "My mind often runs without purpose, just like that horse. Even when I'm doing simple tasks that require no planning or analysis, my thoughts keep racing from one thing to another." "Yes," Master Aizen nodded approvingly. Most people live with minds that run constantly, but they rarely stop to ask where all this mental activity is taking them. They assume that because the mind is busy, it must be accomplishing something important. Over the following days, Shinran began to observe his own mental patterns more carefully. He noticed that his thoughts often raced through elaborate scenarios about future conversations, replayed past interactions with endless variations, or jumped randomly from topic to topic without any clear purpose or direction. During meditation, he would watch thoughts arise and chase each other through his awareness like wild horses galloping across an open plain. Some thoughts seemed to run toward imagined goals, others appeared to flee from uncomfortable feelings, and many simply ran because the habit of mental movement had become so deeply ingrained. One morning, while sitting in meditation and observing this internal circus of racing thoughts, Shinran suddenly experienced a moment of profound stillness. For just a few seconds, the mental running stopped completely, and he found himself resting in a spacious awareness that needed no movement, no destination, no urgent purpose. In that moment of stillness, Shinran understood what Master Aizen had been teaching him about the running horse. His thoughts had been racing not because they had important places to go, but because they had developed the habit of constant movement. Like the horse that continued running long after the thunder had passed, his mind kept generating activity long after any real need for mental work had ended. When the brief moment of stillness passed and thoughts began arising again, Shinran didn't try to chase them away or force them to stop. Instead, he watched them with gentle curiosity, the way he might watch clouds passing through an empty sky. Some thoughts seemed to be running toward imaginary goals, others appeared to be fleeing from uncomfortable feelings, and many simply ran because running had become their nature. Over the following weeks, as Shinran continued to practice this gentle observation of mental activity, something remarkable began to happen. The thoughts didn't stop arising, but they gradually lost their frantic quality. Like a horse that finally realizes there is no predator chasing it, his mental activity began to slow down naturally when it was no longer fed by the anxiety of trying to get somewhere. "Master," Shinran said one evening after a particularly peaceful meditation session, "I think I understand now what you meant about the running horse. My thoughts were racing because they had forgotten how to be still, not because they had anywhere important to go." Master Aizen nodded with approval. "Yes. And what have you discovered about the nature of this stillness?" "I've learned that stillness is always here," Shinran replied. "It's not something I have to create or achieve. It's the space in which all the mental running happens. When I stop trying to control or direct my thoughts, they naturally slow down and eventually settle, like a horse that finally stops running and remembers it can simply graze in the field where it already stands." "And how has this understanding changed your daily life?" Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Shinran considered the question thoughtfully. "I noticed that much of my mental activity was unnecessary movement, like the horse running from thunder that had already passed. When I catch my mind racing through endless scenarios or worries, I can ask myself, is there really somewhere this thinking needs to go, or is it just running from old habits?" He paused, listening to the peaceful evening sounds around the temple. "Most of the time, I discover that my thoughts were running because they had forgotten how to rest, not because there was any real urgency or important destination." From that day forward, Shinran's practice deepened significantly. He learned to distinguish between useful mental activity that had genuine purpose and the restless thinking that arose simply from the habit of staying busy. Like a skilled horseman who knows when to give his mount direction and when to let it rest, Shinran developed the ability to engage his mind when focus was needed and allow it to settle into natural stillness when no mental work was required. Years later, when other students would come to him struggling with racing thoughts and mental restlessness, Shinran would often tell them about the morning he watched a magnificent horse run past the temple. "The mind is like that horse," he would explain. "It runs because it has learned that running is what minds do, not because it knows where it's going." Once you understand that most mental activity is just old habit, you can begin to appreciate the stillness that was always here, waiting beneath all the unnecessary movement. This story of the running horse reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most practical insights about the nature of mind. Most of us live with constant mental activity that feels urgent and important, but much of this thinking is simply habit, like a horse that keeps running long after the original cause for alarm has passed. Our thoughts often race through endless scenarios, replay old conversations, worry about future events, or jump from topic to topic without any clear purpose. We assume this mental busyness is necessary and productive, but when we observe carefully, we often discover that much of it is simply the mind's habit of staying in motion. The thunder that started the horse running represents the various stimuli in our lives that trigger mental activity: stress at work, conflicts in relationships, news about world events, or even just the general pace of modern life. Once our minds learn to race in response to these triggers, they often continue racing even when the original causes are no longer present. Understanding this pattern can be deeply liberating. When we recognize that much of our mental restlessness is habit rather than necessity, we can begin to distinguish between thoughts that serve a genuine purpose and thoughts that are simply running because they've forgotten how to be still. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might gently observe your own mental activity. Notice if your thoughts are racing towards some important destination, or if they're simply running because running has become their habit. See if you can find the stillness that Shinran discovered, the spacious awareness that remains peaceful whether thoughts are moving quickly or slowly. As our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism draws to its natural close, you've traveled far tonight. Not in distance, but in understanding. You've discovered that the peace you seek isn't something to achieve through struggle, but something to uncover by releasing what obscures it. Each step of this journey has been a gentle return to what you already knew in your deepest heart, but had perhaps forgotten beneath the noise of daily life. Each story you've heard carries the same gentle truth. The contentment your heart longs for has been here all along, waiting beneath the surface of your searching. The running horse taught you that much of mental activity is simply old habit, thoughts racing not because they have somewhere important to go, but because they've forgotten how to be still. The empty container revealed that what you seek is the very awareness doing the seeking, always present, always complete, never actually missing. The farmer who stopped fighting the weather showed you how to work with life rather than against it. The student who embraced his inner winter discovered that difficult emotions, like harsh seasons, serve purposes we may not immediately understand. The merchant who set down his heavy sacks learned that freedom comes not from accumulating more, but from releasing what we think we cannot live without. The monk with his empty cushion reminded you that spiritual practice is not about becoming someone special, but about gradually letting go of all the ideas we carry about who we think we are. These teachings work not through your effort to remember them, but through their natural resonance with the wisdom you've always carried. Like tuning forks that vibrate in harmony when placed near each other, these ancient insights awaken something in you that has been waiting patiently for recognition. You don't need to force these understandings into your daily life. They will emerge naturally, the way flowers bloom when conditions are right, bringing greater ease to your relationships, your work, and your relationship with yourself. You don't need to remember every detail or solve every problem before you sleep. The profound rest that awaits you comes not from having everything figured out, but from trusting that you can meet whatever arises with the same natural wisdom that beats your heart and breathes your breath without your effort. This trust is not something you must create, but something you can simply stop preventing, like removing the barriers that block sunlight rather than trying to manufacture light. Let your body sink completely into relaxation now. Feel yourself releasing into the support beneath you. Notice how your breathing slows naturally without any effort on your part. This is the same effortless intelligence that the Buddhist masters learned to trust in all areas of life. The Buddhist masters discovered that sleep is not an escape from consciousness, but consciousness returning to its most natural, effortless state. In this sacred rest, you join centuries of seekers who found that the deepest peace comes not from getting what we want, but from recognizing the completeness that needs nothing added to be perfect. As you drift toward sleep, you might sense that you're not losing consciousness, but discovering what consciousness is like when it stops trying to be conscious. This is the same awareness that witnessed all the stories tonight, that felt recognition when truth was spoken, that remains unchanged whether you're awake or asleep. Rest in this awareness now, knowing that it requires nothing from you, asks nothing of you, simply welcomes you home to what you have never actually left. These ancient teachings will continue working in their own way and their own time, like seeds planted in fertile ground. Some insights may blossom tomorrow, others may take weeks or months to fully unfold. Trust this natural timing, just as you trust your body to restore itself during sleep without your conscious management. Your task now is simply to rest, knowing that the awareness which received these stories is already whole, already at peace, already home. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.